What was the best thing the quiet kid has said or done in class? When I was in kindergarten we had a buddy system to help us make friends easily. I have always been an extrovert, so I was paired with most introverted quiet kid in my class. He barely spoke, but for some reason I liked him, and we played together often. My father got transferred to a different state that year, so I had to go as well. He was pretty sad when I told him, and when I was leaving I gave him a Chinese yuan coin that I used to play with. Story till here is what my parents told me. I have almost no memory of this except for the coin. 7 years later, I was in 6th grade and my dad had just gotten transferred to a different state again. I was short and chubby back then, and I used to get picked on by the class bullies. I expected it to be better when I moved, so I was pretty happy. When I started at my new school it was basically the same thing all over again. Just different bullies doing the same thing. We had lunch breaks out in the open, and during one such lunch break, I tripped while I was walking and bumped into one of my bullies and made him drop his lunch. You guessed it right, they were not happy. They ganged up on me and started shoving me pretty hard. Thankfully the break was over so they stopped and headed back to class. Little did I know they planned to humiliate me in class. They planned to pour water on my pants as I was entering the classroom, and we are gonna spread the rumor that I had peed my pants. When I was about to enter, thought someone came from inside the classroom and stood between me and the bully and took a splash of water to his side. Turns out this guy heard them talk about it and decided to act on it. The guy who got splashed was the same quiet guy from earlier. He didn't know who I was and neither did I at first. I found out later when I saw the yuan with him. He had his mom stitch it to his backpack. World is a small place indeed. Edit. Wow, didn't expect this one to blow up. Thanks everyone who likes it. For those who are calling the story a fake, I'm not sure how I can prove it to you tbh, haha, so I'm not gonna try. Edit 2. The coin was a yuan. I have been calling it yen for a long time and it kinda stuck. My apologies. Also I got the coin back when we had to part ways again, when my father got transferred about 3 years after this incident. Edit 3. Wow, thanks for the silver, anonymous. Edit 4. Thanks for the other silvers as well. Means a lot to me. My final year of English class in high school. I live in the UK by the way, so I was 16. Was super tight knit. We had running jokes and everyone kinda left everything at the door with regards to cliques and sheet. So at the end of the year the teacher gave out awards, and the quiet kid got the award for saying a grand total of 4 words in the whole 2 years we were there. However, a bit of a follow up from that is that shortly thereafter we dated for a short while, and she was incredibly talkative, which was very strange, because I had only talked to her once or twice in the 5 years of secondary school. So Courtney, if you're out there, say more sheet cause you're pretty cool. Not that anyone asked, but I thought it was funny to add that my award was to Batsy for saying the most inappropriate thing at the most inconvenient time to the most unsweetable person, which was almost the polar opposite of Courtney's. Edit. It was not one specific thing I said, instead it was a string of incidents, some of which involved jokes about kicking puppies, socialism and Macbeth's extramarital affairs with another student's mother. Quiet kid was in my friendship group at school, and even then, I don't think I ever heard him speak. Nice guy still, somehow, I think. Despite his total not speaking, there are 2 things he did that stand out that I remember about him to this day. Firstly, one day, he just straight up fainted in a science class. Doesn't appear to have been anything in said class that would have triggered it. Unfortunately our labs had those high stools, so it was quite a waypoint. The second thing was at a lunchtime. We were at our usual spot by the benches, doing whatever we always did, and at some point we realized he's holding a handful of screws and nuts. After a minute we realized he'd taken all the screws and nuts out of one of the picnic benches, but it was still totally intact. We have zero idea why, but it was outstanding work, especially as we didn't know he was doing it until he did it. Laughing, but realizing we would get ours handed to us if anyone found out. We tried to figure out next steps. So of course some idiot leans on the bench, instantly flat packing it in one fluid motion, just as the caretaker walks past. When I was 13, I was friends with a quiet Brazilian boy who usually preferred to fill his head with knowledge than play with other people. I was the real only person he could talk to freely without feeling self-conscious. We got bullied by these 5 top dogs repeatedly. All the stereotypical hey, wimp, give me your lunch money nonsense point basically. There was this one time when I ran out of lunch money the second week running. The toppest dog pinned me to a wall, spitting some more stereotypical bully bullshittery in my face when we, and everyone else in the cafeteria, hear a loud hey. Look. The other wimp. Toppest dog rolls eyes, and lets go of me to walk over to where friend is. Toppest dog's friends follow him. Friend was pissed. Everyone could see. You. Looking for a fight, wimp. Toppest dog holds up his arms, as if to say here I am, and he spins around in a circle. People were watching now. The first mention of the word fight and people are already betting their lunch money. Friend's hands close into violent fists. Seeing this, the 5 dogs make a circle around friend. Well, you got one now pal. Toppest dog goes in for a sucker punch when friend is watching the other dogs, analyzing. Friend does a sort of retreat, which he later explained to me was called a jinger, if I remember correctly. Then he goes ham. Do you know how long the fight lasted? A fake whooping dude an amount of faking 15 seconds. The bullets didn't even land a single blow. My friend only used kicks. I was laughing and crying at the same time. It was glorious, seeing those G-Watts sat flat on their ass. Toppest dog clutching his groin for dear faking life. It turns out that friend had been doing Capoeira, a Brazilian martial arts, for almost 10 years and was particularly good at it. The reason he didn't beat those pricks to a pulp earlier was because he was told by his teacher slash coach slash whatever fancy name he gave it that he was only allowed to use his skill in life-threatening situations. Apparently he got so pissed off that he couldn't hold back and, I'm quoting here, had to put those bullies down in the dirt where they belonged. All of a sudden everyone wanted to be friends with my friend. Everyone wanted to be friends with me too because of my association with him. To pay him back, I took the blame for the bully's beating and received the week of after-school detentions for him to not mess up his perfect behavior record. Totally worth it though. Developmentally challenged kid. It was 4th grade and I didn't know the term autism. I don't know what his deal was, but sometimes he'd have meltdowns. Particularly if he felt judged negatively by an authority figure. He broadcast as loud as possible that he was a victim, and I'm sure bullies noticed, but there was usually a parapro around. Next year, new school, no caretaker, some kid takes a run at Chris. Talks some shit. Be quiet, you're harmless. You won't do anything to me. You're all talk. Some combination of this ethos. He laid out in like a sentence and a half that this kid was a pattern in the Matrix, a puppet with no puppet master living a lie. Just totally smashed this kid's entire personal and walked away. Being dismissed so publicly by someone with no social capital was something beautiful to see. Chris turned out to do fine in regular classes, maybe special quiet rooms for tests, and he had deep competence in narrow subject matters. Struggled with lots of core classes. History he was like a sponge is stupid because it just absorbs what is around it and puts it back out, but he wasn't just memorizing. He would contextualize it, put it all together, and really got all that stuff. Ever since I left to go to a sporting school I sorta had no friends, so my confident roasting self was left behind with my other friends. It was my English class I kept to myself and never really spoke. From lesson 1 from some stupid reason the English teacher was giving me shit, and if you knew me from my old school I was the leader from my group, the funny one who'd literally entertain the whole class, so I was getting really pissed off, but continued not to react. It got to like week 8 of her constantly picking on me, always pulling me up on things, and announcing it in front of the whole class. It was one day I was feeling more comfortable with the girl next to me as we played the same sport. We were doing a test, and as a joke I said, "Oh my god, stop cheating." Girl's name. The teacher immediately turned to me and started screaming at me for embarrassing my friend when my friend was laughing. That was it. I ripped into that beach like there was no tomorrow. "Teacher, how dare you embarrass her name? She's not even cheating. I'm sick of your pathetic behavior." Me. "Oh, but I didn't miss, and I don't know about you, but I'd say you'd know a lot about cheating." It was made aware that she cheated on her husband, got in lots of trouble, but felt glorious. I'm in a music class at a high school. Basically some of the best musicians of our age crammed together, so as you can guess we are all pretty insane. At a pet class once, one of my best friends, A, who was outgoing with friends, but otherwise quiet, had a singing lesson. Q pet teacher, S Roth. A asks S if they can leave for their in-school double bass lesson. A is non-binary. Will be using theirs pronoun. S asks if A has a slip to excuse them. A explains that no, they were not given one. Could they get one after their lesson and bring it back to her? S is mad. S says no, goes on a rant about how music teachers disrespect pet teachers, how they think pay is the least important subject, yada yada yada. A is mad. A is a devoted musician and they cannot and will not miss their double bass lesson. S becomes enraged. Mind you, this is a 38-ish-year-old woman who teaches pet and insists they cannot go without their slip. A begins to reply with things along the lines of, well that's stupid, and I don't care, then you can't stop me, and I'm going anyway. S is shook that her fragile dominance has been toppled. Mind you, the entire class is waiting for the lesson to start while A and S are arguing. S eventually yells that they'll be marked truant if they do. Q I don't care. A walks off to their music lesson, and S hurriedly sends off myself and my classmates on a run. They can do that, they're pet teachers. When we get back, she's bad-mouthing A, calling A she multiple times, when A was very obviously and openly non-binary. etc. Pointer ends up having a chat without assistant principal and S, but assistant principal lets it go pretty much, because she thinks A is a badass is the new class meme. Rivalry between A and S still stands. Obligatory first post, phone, failed student of the American education system. Point. When I was in high school, I was the fat kid, but also a social chameleon. We had one kid who everyone called Karate Joe. KJ would just walk from class to class mumbling random karate movie lines. One day I had brought a ton of donuts for my ROTC officer meeting, 0530, and there's KJ doing his thing. I walk over to him and offer him his choice of donuts before my meeting. He took a Boston cream, I remember, because they are my favorite, and just kept going on. Point. A few days later some jock thugs are bullying me while in uniform. As an officer, I wore a suit also known as dress blues that paired with the price of the uniform and all the decorations we had to wear. Fighting back was difficult, knowing I wouldn't put hands on them. Cue a blur and loud war tap. KJ straight up flying kicked this kid in the head like Kung Lao. Mortal Kombat, not bicycle kicks. The bully and his friends took off as he screamed, "Stay away from my friend." We became best friends. Turns out he's autistic, and growing up martial arts movies were the only thing he would watch. Dad put him in karate to help with self-esteem and self-defense from bullying. Worked. I was the quiet kid. Also, fat and nerdy. Point. Then I went to a new middle school. Now I was fat, quiet, nerdy, and new. Point. First day of class, quickly realize who the class bully is, as I was his new favorite target. This went on for a while. Point. We still had recess, and basically all the boys would play football or soccer. I suck at soccer. Football it is. One day, I get the ball, and the bully decides the game of two-hand touch is now tackle, because he wanted to hurt me. He failed, but wrapped me up, and kept trying to drag me down. He slid down, and ended up pulling down my pants, which gave him some new ammo. Point. Next down, he's quarterback. I walked to the far side of the field, covering no one. I think they thought I was walking off an embarrassment. Hike is called. I ran behind their line, and blindside tackled him at a full sprint. Shoulder to kidneys, with all my might. I wanted to destroy him. Everyone was looking for his pass, so they all clearly saw me do it. They all saw him go flying. They all saw him writhing on the ground, screaming. Everyone froze, because the kid was screaming bloody murder. I picked up his fumble, jogged for a touchdown, and walked back to the line. Point. By that point, teachers had run over, and were asking what happened. Oh, Joe wanted to play tackle instead of two-hand touch. Not a classroom, but a similar situation. We had Billy, a kid with Down syndrome. He was 3 years younger than me, and I coached him at the local baseball park. We had a program where the travel team guys coached and helped with the special league kids on Sundays. When we could point, well, one day we are playing our travel game at another park and Billy and his family came to watch the tournament and support us. It was between innings and Billy was over by our dugout saying hey to the guys he knows. One of the local kids from the opposing park's team was walking by and says something along the lines of faking retard. We'd been there the whole weekend, so I don't know the backstory there, but we were also south of Atlanta, so this wasn't exactly unexpected behavior. Unfortunately, we had this game in hand, so in a no pressure situation we brought him into the dugout to hang with the dudes after this, as Hat showed his true colors. We won handily, and after games you typically go to the outfield or somewhere, and the coach talks to you, win or lose. Billy gets invited by coach. Coach is going over the game, where we need to improve, where we excelled, etc. When you win, somebody gets the game ball. He gave it to Billy and everyone erupted into cheers. We chased him off the field towards the families. We exit the dugout and Billy pulls coach's sleeve and tells him he has something to say to folks. So coach gets the crowd together. When I say crowd, baseball and football in the South draw a lot of people at any level. At this point the story about the asshole kid had made it through the stands. It's little league. The stands and the dugouts are attached so people heard. Billy proceeds to hold up his game ball and endearingly tell coach he's so happy and thanks him repeatedly. While still holding up his game ball at the top of his lungs, yells pretty good for a faking retard. I don't think I've heard people pause and then burst into gut-wrenching laughter in such harmony. It was a beautiful moment that still gets talked about years later. We had this real rambunctious teacher in 5th grade. He was, still is, a huge high school basketball scout, so imagine that type of personality. He was an older guy, so he didn't really enjoy backtalk very much. I would know. I served many detentions for it, and would punish accordingly and usually on the spot. We also had one kid who was real quiet, kinda chubby, didn't have too many friends at the time, wore glasses, etc. The deck was stacked against him. Well, this teacher brings the class back inside the classroom after walking us through the school. We were apparently rowdy coming back, because as we sat down he started going in on us, saying how we can't act like that through the school because it reflects on both us and him. The following exchange evolved from their teacher: when you go throughout the halls being loud, it makes you guys look bad, but more importantly it makes me look bad. Quiet kid, you already look bad. The whole classroom erupted in laughter. Sensing he had lost control, he had no choice but to find humor in it as well, and started chuckling. The kid was never punished, and actually grew up to be quite famous. That kid's name? Albert Einstein. Okay, I made that last part up, but the rest happened. I teach at an urban school with an 85% minus 90% black population, but we have a lot of immigrant students as well. One year my 4th period class was brutal. Tough kids, loud, hard, mostly male. One kid I specifically knew was a drug dealer who flashed large stacks in the middle of class, sometimes trying and failing to teach. That class was close to breaking me. Anyway, I teach humanities, and we had a project where a student had to present their favorite song, the artist, the tempo, rhythm, melody, etc. And then we play the song. Kids were picking their favorite songs, almost all rap, and mostly ripping each other's choices to shreds when they were played. Pretty negative overall. The last presenter was a very quiet, sweet, Middle Eastern girl who had barely spoken all year. She brought a song up to show me, and while the other kids mostly screamed and ignored us, I let her present her info to me quietly. Her song was What Makes You Beautiful by One Direction. I was nervous for her, but I didn't want to treat her any differently, so I quieted the class as best I could and fired it up on YouTube. What happened next was the last thing I ever expected to see. The entire room, every single kid, even the hardest kids in the room, burst into song and dance. We were dumbfounded. Soon she was laughing, I was laughing, and we both watched as the room turned into a One Direction concert. The bell rings, and everyone files out into the hall, singing and dancing. To this day it's one of my favorite memories as a teacher. Not in school, but same kind of bully situation. Me and a couple friends would hang out at a pool hall after work. It was popular for us too old to hang out with high school crowds, but not old enough to get in the bar folks. Anyway, there was a guy that always came in and sat by himself and ate a bag of chips and drank a beer. Not a big guy, well dressed, nothing really noteworthy about him. He'd be there an hour just crowd watching, minding his own business, and leave. A couple times a week a couple roundnecks came in to drink a few and shoot pool. There was some dispute between one of them and the quiet guy, and from then on every night they were in there the one roundneck would try and start cheat with the quiet guy. One evening I guess the guy had it, and they got into a verbal altercation that resulted in the roundneck inviting him to take a swing, and he laughed, stood up, and took a swing, and shattered a bottle of Trappist Red Devil sauce across the dude's head. Laid him out, and cut his head up, but not too sure how bad. Blood and Louisiana hot sauce looks about the same in pool hall lighting. The roundneck's buddies all got up, but so did the rest of the pool hall, and despite what TV will tell you, 40 people in a confined space are not really eager to start a free-for-all melee point anyway. His buddies carried him, and they didn't come back for a long time. When they did they acted like it never happened, but also didn't screw with the quiet guy. It was how I learned that if you're inviting someone much smaller/weaker than you to a friendly bout of fisticuffs, and they laughingly accept, then you might want to reevaluate the situation. In the 10th grade, we had 2 new English teachers and the English department consolidated all of the midterms so everyone would have to take the exact same test on the books we read. The 2 new teachers also completely consolidated their curriculum and taught, or tried to teach, identical things and were the ones who got the opportunity to write the midterm. They based the entire test around what they had taught, including interpretations. Some of the questions were multiple choice opinion based questions. For example, in your opinion, what does X represent? Or what should X represent? Completely missing the point of symbolism and opinions. My teacher taught a single 10th grade English class and wasn't included in the midterm writing process, and when we all took the test, the questions were not related to anything we learned in class. Remotely, especially since so much of it was based on the interpretations of these 2 new teachers who had never actually taught a class before. The highest grade in our class, which was filled with very intelligent kids for the most part, was a 60 point. We were all discussing the midterm and how we needed to be able to retake it when an extremely quiet girl who barely never participated in class and aced most of her classes raised her hand very politely, and when called, just meekly said, well, doctor, teacher's name. This midterm was horse shit and I think you know it. Please give us all an A. The quiet kid in class helped me when my backpack busted. I'm running through the lunchroom and my backpack opens. It was one of those cool Jurassic Park bags that looked like a box on your back and opened from the side. Well, the zipper fails and all my sheet gets tossed on the ground. Everyone laughs, but I wasn't sad because sheet happens. Pick it up and get on with it. As I'm picking and they're laughing, he comes up and starts grabbing things. I think he's going to take my stuff, but before I say anything he's putting it in my bag. I say thanks and ask him if he wants to go outside to play. He just looks at me and shyly walks away. Doesn't speak. I knew his name, so I made it a point to say hi to him. You could tell he likes to be said hi to, but he doesn't have the social ability to do anything. He would kind of smile then freeze. So I would just say hi and not make a big deal. As I got older I wish I did a better job of being his friend. I mean, I know I was like 7 at the time and didn't have the maturity to do it, but I make it a point now to do it. My company has a dishwasher that works in our Sacramento store. Same kinda deal. On the spectrum. Had a caseworker help him the first couple of weeks. Good dude. I always make it a point to say hi to him, and he smiles and squeaks our hello. Treat him just like everyone else, and don't push him to be social. It was the highlight of my day. Hey Chris, what ya eating? Fish and chips? They any good? Smiles, yeah. Really good. That's cool. I'm gonna try them. Don't eat them all, okay? Okay. Alright man, I'll catch you later. I asked the regional the other day about him. Says the store loves him, and he's doing great. My mom taught me empathy. When I was young, I could have been braver as a teen to stand up for people. Now as an adult I make it a point to empathize and try to teach anyone about how important empathy is to being a successful leader. So this is crazy. Happened to me in the 8th grade. Backstory, I wasn't a good kid, always in trouble. I did drugs a lot starting off middle school, 6th grade, ended up in rehab by the end of my 8th grade year. So my 8th grade year I was always high in class. Today was no exception. I took Xanax. I was always barred out. Now that I've explained myself, let me explain the quiet kid. His name is T. T is faking out the gate weird. Like hunched over, always scratching in a notebook, never drawing, just scribbling. Always sat with his feet in the chair. Hissed at people in class in the halls. He was weird. He'd screech, he'd scratch, he'd growl. He almost never talked. For my history class he sat next to me every day. We had desks next to each other with chairs that weren't attached. Never past middle school did I get this luxury. I'm a big guy, the chairs being attached was always a pain in my ass. The day this event happened we had to take a test in history and the teacher would hand out these big cardboard folders so we couldn't cheat. So I'm barred out at my desk taking my test and Tyler is sitting next to me as always, hunched over, feet in his chair, scribbling. I'm not paying attention. Then I start to hear him making noises. Like grunts and groans of pain. I didn't care. Weird kid sheet, right? So I keep going with my test, but he keeps getting louder. He finally shifts and puts his foot down, and I see it. He's got his dick in his hand and he's pushing one piece of pencil lead after the other down the whole urethra. I'm mortified at this point. Also on a lot of drugs, so I shove out of my desk, knocking into him, breaking the lead off, and I scream, "Me, dude, are you shoving pencil lead in your dick?" By this time he's screaming as well and doubled over in pain as I had caused him to break off I don't know how many pieces of lead in his dick hole. The whole class is staring, and this kid is huddled at the ground at this point, like crying and clutching his dick. The school officer comes and carries him to the nurse's office. We never see him again. TLDR, quiet kid shoved pencil lead in his dick. I'm so high I freak out and make him break it and alert everyone in class. TLDR, guy mimed some crazy graphic stuff in front of the whole class. Got cheers from teacher and students alike. We were doing final projects for this philosophy class my senior year of high school. We were given a lot of freedom to do what we wanted, and this dude certainly took the liberty. Before his bit, the teacher asked any students who thought they would be offended by obscene language to leave. I'd known him a little better than most people in my school, and he was a witty, crude, funny guy, so I wasn't surprised. His project was a performance of a stand-up rite of passage, the Aristocrats. Before it begins, the song of the mountain god starts playing from the back of the room. He gets up in front of the class and starts going into this insane story, miming all sorts of actions as he describes. A man and his wife go into a talent agency and say they have the greatest act and he just has to see it. The agent says, "Show me," and the man takes out his dick and starts faking his wife. Meanwhile, the guy's pelvic thrusting graphically and riding this woman like a bronco, all while the music builds in the background. He said, "And then I take this snake and I start faking her with it," and he mimed shoving a snake right up there. Now if you've forgotten, he is doing this in front of 20 of his classmates in high school. Everyone's faces were priceless. Then he says, "And then and he chopped off the snake's head." The music builds to the greatest crescendo, da-do-do-da-dee-uh-h-d-u-h-h, at which point, he takes off his pants, under which he has another pair of pants. He shoves his dick in the snake's neck, then says, "And then, I start faking her with it," and starts thrusting again. All of us are howling at this point. The agent said back, quote, "What is the name of your act?" "The Aristocrats," he says with a bow. Cue applause and more laughter from my graduating class than I'd ever heard. Very fun all around. His version was much better than mine. Perhaps he'll see this and correct me. This is a long story, but it's worth it. In high school we had this really crappy English teacher. I don't mean the mildly infuriating late marked assignment. I meant like next level IGF type of teacher. For context, this teacher shows zero interest in teaching, rolls his eyes every 5 minutes, plays rap ultra loud in headphones, copies other teachers' lesson plans, teaches over YouTube, Says obviously way too much. Anyway, this teacher 2 weeks ago decided that it would be a good idea in English to do a full-on 20 minutes roleplay complete with props, memorized scripts, costumes and the works. Normally this would be a fun assignment, but because he hadn't managed the past units it was due in 3 days and we would get no class time. We got placed in a group of 3 and were each expected to do a scene from a book. Basically the teacher wanted way too much in too little time and didn't offer any clarification for much. For the next 2 days we had to work endlessly and invite kids over to our houses and stay up overnight, yes with them over, just to get it finished. Point come the day of the presentation everyone was stressing. We all are semi-prepared, or at least the best we could. One of the 2 people in my group was the alleged quiet kid. He's the stereotypical shy kid, but anyway he's going nuts sweating bullets and all. Point our grump was scheduled to go first, and we go up prepare, and then start presenting. A minute in our presentation the teacher yawns, then puts in headphones, and then goes on his phone. This kid loses it. Paraphrasing and memory. Kid, excuse me, who do you think you are? You slave children over a last minute major project, and then don't even listen to us. How dare you? Since the start of the year you've been nothing but a lazy piece of shit and I've worked my ass off. Since the start of the course you do nothing but sit on your laziest teacher. Get out now, you have no right to speak to me like that. I demand respect and you're gonna give it to me, kid. Respect is earned, not demanded. You will give me respect though, because I've earned it working my ass off collecting evidence against you for the past 5 weeks, all of which I will go give to the principal right now, since you so kindly convinced to. Teacher, wait you little shit, get back here. Kid, I thought you asked me to leave. Walks out door. Teacher, a long string of curse words. Kid, pops head through door. By the way, is it okay to not blur out your face when this goes on CNN? My cousin knows somebody who works there. In the end the teacher got fired. The kid didn't get suspended. The principal convinced him not to give it to the media. Unfortunately, kid went from being quiet to being the most popular kid. Point thank you Steven for putting Mr. P in his place. I started a new school in grade 5 and there was a girl who never spoke, not a word. I remember the school counselor brought me and her into her office and tried to encourage the girl, Crystal, to say something to me. Crystal, after a lot of pressure, turned her head and whispered hi. The counselor was pleasantly surprised that she did even that. She said she must like you. Point I was Crystal's friend after that. She never talked to me, but I understood she spoke at home and didn't actually have any sort of mental disability. I liked her because she was a good listener. I was in her class in grade 6 as well. Point then in grade 7 we had a heinous bitch of a teacher. She bullied the kids who weren't popular. I could go on and on about how she verbally and mentally abused some kids. Crystal and I were the worst. For example, I was a tiny girl. Boys would physically assault me, destroy my belongings. Girls bullied me relentlessly. I'd tell me teacher and she'd tell me it was my fault for not dressing like them. Crystal would be called on to read a paragraph from a book. She'd put her head down and shake it no. Teacher would roll her eyes and go to the next kid. Point one day Crystal got pissed and threw a pencil at the chalkboard and stormed out because the teacher was being a bitch. We were stunned. Everyone acted like it didn't happen. She was back the next day and even I avoided her. The teacher laid off of her a few months later. I guess Crystal wasn't paying attention and the teacher smacked the chalkboard as hard as she could to get her attention. Crystal almost jumped out of her chair. She slowly sat up and while staring at the teacher, pissed her pants like frickin' Reagan on The Exorcist and calmly walked out. Point she didn't come back to class ever, but when I went into grade 8, which was a new school, she was there and talking like a totally normal person. His takes place in a class for PMEL that I took in the USAF. There was an airman that was named Brandon. He was that guy. Quiet and reserved. Pair this with the shaved head and glasses and you get the idea. He almost never spoke and seldomly laughed. Just that guy who would rather be home playing video games and anywhere in the world but Mississippi. The other airman was a female named Lindsay. She was the total opposite. Loud and cocksure like many females become in male-dominated environments. She would talk about sex and open relationships, and in general try to command the attention of the young men in the room. About 4 weeks into this training, Lindsay is standing in front of the door that Brandon needs to get through to line up for whatever non-priors had to do that afternoon. She is talking and talking like she is known to do. Brandon waits patiently and sees that he will be going nowhere fast if he doesn't say anything. Then he hits her with, "Hey Lindsay, this reminds me of my favorite song." Now everyone kind of stops cause Brandon said something and this draws a perfect silence to the room. Lindsay looks at him, a bit taken aback, and says, "Which song is that, Brandon?" And out of nowhere he breaks into, "Move, beach, get out that way. Get out that way, beach. Get out that way," in his best white guy rapping Ludacris voice. I was laughing so hard I almost had to grab my dick, like when you tell a little boy to hold it when he says he has to pee. I can still laugh myself almost to tears when I think about that day. Okay, so I was the quiet kid all high school, sleep through all but a few classes, and didn't really talk. My junior year we had tables we sat at. I sat third to last row of tables in my science class. I would lay my head down and sleep unless the two people that sat at my table needed an answer or wanted to give me food. The table behind me was a kid named Matt. He was the nicest, sweetest kid I ever met. He happened to be in an electric wheelchair since his feet and legs never grew to the right size to support his weight. He had a raid at school. The table behind him was the jocks and unpopular kids. They always used to hop on Matt's chair and get rides to class. He thought they liked him. They were doing it to make fun of him. Well, one day I woke up to the girls that I shared a table with trying to get the teacher's attention. I awake cranky. I notice that the teacher is going off on some weird tangent about how music is the purest form of science band bullshit. It takes me all of 3 seconds to realize that Matt is crying like full on waterworks and his aide is trying to help him calm down while every few seconds telling the two tables of popular kids to shut up. I listen for a second since I know the teacher is just gonna keep on her tangent like she does every other day. The kids are making fun of Matt cause his colostomy bag smells a bit, and they're making fun of him for not being able to go to the bathroom like they can. I hear one of the kids tell the aide he'll/Matt's tires if they say anything to anyone. I stood up and dragged my chair to their table like I was gonna sit there. At that point the teacher told me I needed to sit down and stop interrupting her class. I hit the kid who had been threatening to slash Matt's tires with my chair. I quickly got tackled and beat up by his friends. I was pulled down to the office and they threatened to expel me. Until half the class came forward and told them why I had done what I did, and my mom threatened to sue them for allowing the bullies to attack Matt that way. I ended up getting a 10-day suspension and forced anger management classes. About a week after I get back and get switched science classes, I go to leave school to find Matt waiting for me with a dude that was a beast of man, and I happen to know sold pot and blow in the area. Turned out it was Matt's older brother who paid for all Matt's medical bills, and he wanted to thank me and let me know if I ever needed anything just call him. Not class, but a convention I was working. There's a few of us running staff suite, where working staff gets food at an Anincon and it's post lunch. The staff and I were resting after the lunch rush and just giving latecomers leftovers. It's pretty quiet, and the husband of the head of staff suite, Matt, is quietly punching out cutouts for some of his future match work. Matt is a quiet man, doesn't say much, but he's pretty gifted in the makerspace. A seriously smart guy. Has just listening to us have calm conversations about whatever a staffer walks in, wants to know what we have. Sandwich fixings, mostly. He makes some PBJ and sits with us and starts talking about his online character. This was around when EverQuest was big. None of us cared. We tried to change the subject several times, but within a minute, this guy somehow changed the subject back to his MMORPG character. Finally he just hijacks every pause in conversation to talk about his character, not getting any hint that no one cares about it. You are done talking now. Matt suddenly shouts in an unexpected drill sergeant voice. The guy hesitates and tries to get back on track, but every time he starts to stammer out a continuation of the adventures of Sir Hugh Jivzavuk, Matt just shouts "Ah." and points a finger at him. Eventually the guy gets up and tries to casually wander around the room for an awkward minute and then leaves seconds. After he closes the door, we all break down in peals of laughter. "I'm sorry," Matt said sternly. "I just couldn't listen to that anymore." Matt became a legend that day. I was, and still sort of am, the quiet one. A bit of a goody two shoes too. I always try to do everything right, please those around me, and not draw too much attention to myself. I also enjoy peace and quiet. In contrast, in the 5th grade or so there was one kid I was sort of friendly with who sat at our lunch table, the kind of kid who would talk just to hear his own voice, enjoyed the reactions he would get from being intentionally annoying, etc. Just would not shut up and eat. One day he's being particularly bad, and he also happens to be sitting right next to me. He drives everyone crazy for the first 20 minutes of lunch, then he goes up to get some more food. Before he came back I decided I should try to pull his chair out from under him before he sat down as a joke. Our cafeteria was old and had round tables with metal folding chairs around them, not attached to the table like the classic elementary school lunch table. I didn't expect it to work as well as it did, but I somehow managed to perfectly time it. The chair made a really nice loud clattering noise. His fell straight down to the floor. Everyone in the lunchroom turned around to see. etc. I'm 21 now and still look back on this as one of my slickest moments. LMAO. Not the best story, but it sticks out in my mind. This girl and I were considered the quiet kids in our middle school. First, I want to say that my fellow QK was a beautiful and brilliant human being and will henceforth be dubbed Steve. In 8th grade, our class was in the computer lab to work on essays. The lab was set up where the tables were round with about 6 computers to a table, and if you were in the right seat the teacher would have to walk around the desk to see your screen. Steve, a few other girls and myself had opened up a separate document on Google Docs and had shared each other's accounts so we could chat without breaking the strict "no talking" rule. We each changed our fonts to distinguish ourselves, and it worked like a regular group chat. Steve and I were seated next to each other. All of a sudden we hear from behind us, "What do you think you're doing?" Our classmates, wisely, abandoned ship and clicked out of the document before the teacher could reprimand them as well, and the original document was Steve's. The teacher had her hands on her hips and yelled some more about how she didn't expect such behavior from us, and she was very disappointed. She said the only reason she hadn't written Steven up was because we had never done anything like this before. We absolutely had, and that she was sure we had learned our lesson. We absolutely had not. There's a reason I was so quiet. I was terrified of teachers, most all authority figures actually, and being yelled at was an absolute nightmare for me. My hands were shaking, and I was definitely about to cry. The teacher finally stomped away. After we had apologized. Steve, cool as a cucumber, leaned over to me and whispered, "It's the quiet ones you've got to watch out for." It made me actually laugh out loud, and I had to very quickly mask it as a sneeze and continue to laugh in my arm. It was so unexpected, and it made me instantly feel better. Steve, all these years later, and you are still my hero. As the quiet/good at math kid in class, I'd only talk when someone asked me a math question, or say "go away I'm reading," if I was currently reading a book. However, that one day, the math teacher goes on explaining an advanced equation, which meant I had about 10 minutes to read after finding the answer before anyone else did. So anyway, this other good at math person, who actually talks a lot, raises his hand after about 8 minutes and gives his answer when the teacher points to him, only when he's done explaining. I wasn't really paying attention and wasn't too surprised he got the wrong answer, as he does once in a while. What really baffled me is that the teacher agreed, saying he had the right answer. I suddenly raise my head and the teacher knows something's wrong. I never suddenly stop reading like that. He looks to me and asks what's wrong, and I say they've got the wrong answer. Everyone is now looking at me intensely, as if I'm a weirdo, and the teacher asks me to explain. I explain that they forgot to do something, Can't remember. Too long ago. And everyone looks at the teacher in confusion as he goes through the equation again and finds that I'm right. He congratulates me and goes back to teaching as I continue reading, but no one is listening anymore. So he just gives homework and lets us do our things. Everyone wanted to be friends after that, which really annoyed me cause they talk too much. Thankfully it came back to normal the next week. I could not have lived the whole year with this much attention. I went to a small boarding school. It was mostly day students, but there were quite a few full-time boarders, but I was only weekly, and they'd always invite new boarders to come in a few days before the autumn term started. For example, if term started on Monday, then they'd arrive on the Friday before, so that they could settle in, and would invite some long-time boarders to help out. I was one that was viewed as a rebel in the boarding house, but because I was there for 7 years, the oldest in the house, and was very close friends with the prefect that represented the boarding house, we practically lived together for 7 years and supported each other through a lot, to the point of, despite the fact we left almost a year ago and are at completely different universities, we still talk a lot and consider each other family. They decided to ask me to come because they thought the pair of us would make a good team and help settle the new ones in. Plus there was only one other person boarding in my year group, and she had only been there for a year at the point, so it made sense for me to do it. I accepted the opportunity as it meant I could go on all their excursions. There were 3 or 4 for free that weekend, plus I would have the opportunity to get my stuff settled for several days, so that when school started up I was completely settled into my room, rather than just having one night like usual. It was great, and I ended up making several new friends who I probably wouldn't have spoke to if it hadn't been for that weekend. Plus most of the other girls helping were good friends of mine. There were maybe 6 or 7 of us helping out by showing them around the school to their bedrooms, and generally just assisting the staff and me, and the prefect knew most of the others extremely well and were friends with them, which made working together very easy and pleasant to begin with, and we worked well as a team. But the new girls were mostly quiet and reserved, so I was expecting to have to go up and talk to new people rather than the other way round. Well, we were painting these photo frames to put pictures of our excursions in, having a laugh with the prefect and several new students the night before school officially started, when I feel a tap on my shoulder and I turn around. This girl, who had seemed one of the quieter ones, said to me, bear in mind English was not her first language, "I don't know who you are. So who are you?" I said my name and was like, "What year are you in?" And she said, "I'm in year 12. And I was like, "Oh cool, I'm only a year above you, and our year groups mix a lot, so we'll see a lot of each other," and introduced her to the prefect. It turns out she thought I was several years younger and also a new student, and was quite embarrassed. She ended up being really funny, sarcastic, and clever, leading to everyone loving her to pieces and her being popular throughout the school. I left at the end of that year for university, and she is now deputy head girl, a rare thing for such a new student. Normally they've been there for at least 3 or 4 years, if not the full 7, whereas she was made it at the end of her first year. So never think that's someone quiet, because they might surprise you and end up being popular. I was the quiet kid for most of my school life, but one time, one of my close friends was getting stuff out of her locker after school, and she said these known bullies went up to her cause apparently one of their exes was crushing on her real hard, and rumors went around that he broke up with her to get with my friend. They started yelling at her, and she was also pretty quiet, so she just stood there, mumbling quiet responses and almost started crying. I was coming to meet up with her after school, and luckily I came just in time, cause these crazy girls were ready to literally beat her up cause she wasn't saying anything, which made them angrier. I got real pissed off and yelled at them to get away from her. When they started yelling at me and threatening to fight me, I screamed, "Help! They are beating me up." They were known for getting in trouble for beating kids up and had been on a strike system for this reason. They ran away immediately, looking around at the classroom doors for teachers. One of our favorite teachers came out to check on us, and we told them what happened, and she said she will inform the one girl's on-campus guidance counselor about it. We are still friends to this day, and she's way more confident, and we joke all sometimes about what we would have done then with the confidence we have now. I was the quiet kid, bullied, tortured, shoved in lockers the whole kit, and capital point my junior year of high school this annoying fuck who tortured me all throughout elementary and middle school took my chocolate milk and hit it point my junior year was my growth spurt. I went from 5 feet 2 inches to 5 minutes and 10 seconds over the summer and was lean and mean. Went all state for baseball till I blew my shoulder out later that year. Apparently the chocolate milk was the hill I ended up snapping over. Picked up my lunch tray and swung it like a baseball bat into the side of the kid's head. Repeatedly until he went down point tossed the lunch tray on the floor. Saw my chocolate milk, where he hid it, and calmly sat down to drink it until the teachers showed up and escorted me to the main office. Got 2 weeks out of school suspension, and so did the bully. But I never got faked with too badly from then on out point kid was a monster as well. Big mean old bastard who was full on shaving in 11th grade and 230 pounds. Mostly fat. But he wore combat boots and liked to throw batteries at kids in the auditorium and pretend he was the youngest Navy SEAL ever. I should point out this was the early 90s and a rural school, hence the meager punishment. This happened just last February, 1 month before our batch moved up to 11th grade. There was a film project where the class was divided into 4 groups. We had only 4 weeks to film, but due to other projects and the fact that we cannot film off campus most of us were short on time and was incomplete, or in one group's case hadn't done sheet point. When our teacher confronted us on the supposed say of submission, of course she got pissed, flipped us all off, and even called us idiots, and saying that if she does not get a USB drive containing the respective group's films once her period ends it's over, no more submissions will be accepted. One girl, who was the leader of my group, and for some reason was snickering, asked if we can have an extension right as our teacher was walking out the door. Our teacher said she'd extended until dismissal, which was 5 hours away. The quiet kid, who speaks English more than the native language, rushed to the teacher's room during recess, which coincidentally was after the class, and talked to her. They were talking right outside it, and I passed by them, and I saw the kid crying. Later on it was announced that our teacher gave us an extension. I've forgotten how long it was, but it was enough for us to finish the film. In the end everyone in my batch except for 2 who had problems with grades moved up. Side note, I wasn't even offended that she flipped us off and was actually in, or that she did it, because there were many other instances where we pissed her off before in previous quarters. And it's not every day that you see a teacher doing that in a Catholic school. And if you are wondering, no, she's not hated, she's actually quite loved by many students, and I especially love when she tells our class stories. I was the quiet kid and this wasn't done in class. Maybe this counts, maybe not. I moved away from Memphis, my hometown, about halfway through the 7th grade. I had trouble adjusting. I was a little too weird for the small country town where I ended up. There was this kid in the same grade as me that just got his jollies by giving me a hard time. We lived in the same neighborhood. We rode the same bus and even had a few classes together. He was a total prick and I couldn't get away from him. I'll remember 3 things about him forever: his name, the horrible shit he said and did to me, and how much he loved the game of basketball. He wore jerseys of his favorite players and was always reading the how-to basketball guides written for kids by professionals. One afternoon, after a couple of years of just letting this as run his mouth, he and I ended up being the only 2 guys on a court at the YMCA near our school. So it became a gentleman's game. 10 baskets and stay inside the 3-point line. Fair enough for 2 kids. So I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. As kids, my brother and I played ball. That's all we did during the summer, and then 2 of us, and nearly all of our friends played for local leagues in season. Youth basketball was an enormous part of our lives before we moved. So here we are a few years later, and this guy is certain he can humiliate me. Now I was never going to be an athlete and I could stand to be a little more active these days, but on that particular afternoon I was in better shape than my opponent and it showed. I lit this dude up. 10-3. This was maybe my freshman year of high school. Never heard another word from him. That's the day I learned that actions speak louder than words, and it couldn't have been at the expense of a more deserving person. Mine's a little different, but I so rarely get a chance to tell this story, so fuck it. I attended a Japanese language immersion camp in high school. Most of the kids were actually really cool, but there were of course a couple weebs who only wore anime shirts and whatever, but that was to be expected. There was this one kid who had long greasy hair and always wore black saggy pants, but he never said a word and didn't seem interested in making friends. We were all kind of weird at that camp. To begin with, there's a certain baseline of social awkwardness you have to meet to actually spend weeks in the middle of nowhere with the sole purpose of learning Japanese, so I'm not sure why he would be intimidated, but maybe he was. I'm not sure. Last night of camp, we had a talent show. Everyone sang or danced or told jokes or whatever. It was fun and lighthearted. It's about halfway through the show when the kid steps on stage. We're all a little surprised that he volunteered because he hadn't really been friendly or anything during the weeks we were there. He announces he's going to perform an original song. Cool. So we all shut up and he takes a deep breath. The air is silent. And then he starts screaming. I think, looking back, that he was trying to emulate screamo music. But the noises he was making were not even close to human speech. It was just very deep screaming, like a zombie screech, or maybe a dying bear. Try and make the absolute lowest noise you can make. Now, do that for 3 minutes. That's what he does. There is no music. There is no beat. There is only screaming. To everyone's credit, we all kept quiet, because it was clearly important to this kid and no one wanted to be mean. But it was so hard. My friend genuinely fell off her chair because she was trying so hard not to laugh out loud. Tears were streaming down people's faces. Counselors has to leave the room. It was one of the most insane things I have ever witnessed, but everyone was completely silent. At the end, he just bowed and got off the stage. I think it took another 5 minutes for the next person to actually start performing because everyone was just in a daze. It was absolutely surreal. I was anxious growing up, and I guess you could say I was quiet during class discussion, but I was friends with the majority of my classmates. The backstory justifies my actions. This happened in grade 9. My classmate Colin was kind, a little heavier, and wasn't the most attractive. His dad was a doctor, so he was well off. He started bringing bags of candy from the dollar store to eat in class after a month of school. The bags were crinkly, so everyone would obviously notice and suck up to him for some. The teachers would say share or put it away. He would share with everyone but me and told them all day not to share with me. The teacher never could do anything cause it was always gone in a matter of minutes, but my friends would always grab extra and give it to me anyway. I was always nice to him, even after he kept saying I couldn't have any, but since he started bringing in the candy he singled me out for whatever reason. Everyone knew it was just a ploy to make friends, and people heavily abused it. Our school was close to a mall, so he was taking 2 to 10 of his friends to get whatever they wanted to eat for lunch Monday, Friday. I would tell them later that it's wrong, but they would just brush me off. One time in class, he pulls out the candy as we're learning about onomatopoeia. The teacher wanted each of us to come up with our own unique sentence using it. I think it was because I was hungry and sick of Colin being an asshole at this point. I actually asked him for some, and he said something really snotty, so I said go eat your candy with all of your friends. Lots of people giggled, not sure if it was just all the sugar, but the teacher told us to get back to the lesson. After a few minutes it was my turn to say my onomatopoeia sentence, so I was still kind of sour about earlier, and said bing bang boom Colin's in the room. The whole class and even the teacher burst out laughing. Colin just sat there shocked, and his whole body was red. After a minute of laughing and it not dying down, he left the class and didn't come back. The teacher tried to get after me because Colin went and complained to her, but I said he was singling me out for months and today was the only day I've ever said anything mean to him. She agreed. Lol. Fast forward to high school. Colin notices me in the halls as I'm going to my next class and starts calling me names repeatedly. The voice sounded familiar, so I look in the direction of the voice and we locked eyes. He proceeds to glare then give me the finger. One day he actually body checked me into a locker. I'm a tall girl, so I have no issue standing up for myself. So I said, hey beach boy, if you wanna be an ass, you're gonna get beat. He just repeated with calling me a beach, but never assaulted me again. I told him I'd tell the principal he was bullying me and get him kicked off the football team because me and my friends would record him as I would walk to class. We never. His eye widened and he never said a word to me again. He continued to glare and give me the finger. I'd smile and wave point TLDR. Chubby rich kid would bring candy to class and share W/everyone but me and let 2 to 10 people a day use him to buy food at lunch. After months of exclusion and mistreatment, during an onomatopoeia lesson, he did the candy stunt and wouldn't share. My turn came up to say my onomatopoeia sentence and said bing bang boom Collins in the room. The entire class and teacher laughed for minutes. In junior high I had to take an art class as an elective. 100% hated it as I don't have artistic abilities and would become extremely obsessive if a drawing didn't turn out the way I was imagining it. I wasn't meeting deadlines for assignments. The teacher was ready to fail me. I sat with Annie, a shy petite girl who could whip out the most gorgeous drawings in the blink of an eye. She was talented. I mean, wow. Whenever she would talk, which was rare, it was at a whisper level. It was only the two of us at a table and I would always talk her ear off. She'd just draw and listen. Anyway, the teacher came over to our table and basically told me he was going to fail me because I wasn't showing progress and I was not able to complete the assignments on time. During this, Annie was drawing and keeping her head down, but she pushed her chair back, looked him in the eyes, and tells him he will do no such thing. She stood up for me and told him that she was seeing how I was trying, but I needed more time, that I couldn't be rushed, and that art was just not my forte. I knew what I wanted and how I wanted to draw it, but lacked the practice, ability, and patience. She even told him that if he failed me, she would quit as an artist because of the unfairness. Mind you, I thought that was insane, but it must have spooked the teacher as he knew she had talent. He then said, if she's willing to vouch for you, there must be something she's seeing that I'm not, but I will take her word for it. I ended up passing the class thanks to her. After that we became friends and she would help me with drawing assignments for other classes. Naturally she'd make them much messier to be more in line with my style. I still recall the looks of our classmates being shocked that she could actually get angry. I was quiet kid in the school times, and we had a lot of bullies in school. I didn't really retaliated that much, but few times they stepped over the line and there were bad precedents, 2 of them. I remember very clearly. One kid in my class were kind and friendly one-on-one, but whenever his friends were around he was absolute as whole. One day in class he and his friend were sitting behind me. Our desks have place for 2 students. They were actively hitting and mocking me. It got to a point that my neighbor had to move to another desk just to avoid splash damage. When I realized that teacher will keep ignoring them, I decided to do something that could shut them. I stood up, turned around and flipped their desk on top of them. Teacher was shocked. Class went silent for a moment. They got few bruises and kept complaining that I'm crazy idiot and should be sent into asylum. We all were sent to administratory. Gladly I wasn't punished afterwards. Also that friend ditched everyone in favor of me after a while. He was really sorry and I wasn't holding much grudges, so we kept friendship. Second time one of the main asshats in school were verbally cheating on me, so I said to him to shut your F more. He immediately went physical and I didn't really stood a chance against him. He were as strong as he was dumb. So when I fell from a punch in the belly, I didn't really saw a lot of options and didn't wanted to seem like a weakling to others, since it could lead to more bullying, so I grabbed a chair while he was laughing to his friends and gave him a concussion. They called for my mom and afterwards I got a lot of scolding from teachers, but my mom approved my actions, so I didn't really care. About the guy, he was fine after a while. He still was an asshole towards me, but at least kept the distance. Well, some years back I was the quiet kid. I spent nearly a month without any friends on a classroom pretty much filled with extroverts, so I did a really good job at not talking, so time started to pass and I got some friends, and one of them was this girl that nobody really liked. She was really participative and intelligent, but I think her parents didn't give her enough attention because she had lots of siblings which made her do quite some stuff for attention. Nothing really bad apart from arguing that she was her French twin for like 2 days. Kind of sad. Well, one day she came to my group of friends. She usually traveled between groups, crying because the not so sane girls of the group, one of them liked to spank people out of nowhere, called her a botch because she was friends with one of their boyfriends or the guy they liked, yada yada, and boy, I was pissed. I waited for them on the door of the classroom since recess was over, and as my friends described, my whole face went red and I started to scream to them about how they had no right to say that because, like I said, they weren't saints, and kept them there still screaming but without swearing. A lot of people were shocked since I never screamed. My general tone of voice was so low and I talked pretty fast because it would reduce the time I spent talking with the person, so pretty much exploded on them and made them apologize to said girl. So yeah, that's my story. I don't know if this counts, but once in high school we had to have one of the science teachers step in and teach English for a lesson because our usual teacher was ill. This science teacher was the biggest bitch ever. The whole class began to hate her within the first 5 minutes of the lesson. Halfway through the lesson she had to quickly leave to get some sheets from the printer, so she shouted and told us to stay quiet and don't move while she's gone. By this time the quiet kid in the class had enough, so when he knew she had left he quickly got up, went to the door and locked it. He then looked back at us and without saying a word smiled and walked back to his seat. None of us really knew what to do at this point. We didn't want to get up and unlock the door just in case beach teacher thought it was us locking it, but we also didn't want to get into trouble. A few minutes later the teacher comes back and tries to open the door. She keeps trying to push at it, but it won't budge. She then shouts, "Who the hell locked the door?" This is when quiet kid with an innocent look in his eyes says, "Miss, we haven't locked the door, it's an old room, it might have gotten jammed." She grumbles and walks away. A few minutes later she comes back with another teacher to open the door. Both of them are more or less ramming themselves into the door to open it, but it still won't budge. Quiet kid pipes up again, "Hey miss, maybe get the janitor, that might help." We can't contain our laughter at seeing a 4'9" angry teacher ramming herself into a door. Once both teacher leave again, quiet kid gets up, runs to the door, unlocks it and gets back into his seat. The teacher comes back with the janitor and looks into the room, only to see us looking down and doing our work. We hear the janitor say, "So what's wrong with the door?" She then explains the situation and he just nods. He then pushed down on the handle and pushed the door and it opens. He looks at her with a confused look and says, "Did you push the handle down when you tried to open the door?" The kid just smiles and says, "We've finished the work, can we go now miss?" She mumbles and sighs, "Fine, just go," as she rubs the arm she was using to ram into the door. I'll never forget the quiet kid in my class was reading a hardback copy of Sum of All Fears before biology, where we had those heavy timber slate desks that took the football team to move. Anyways, 2 varsity American footballers, 1 wide receiver and 1 lineman started giving the kid sheet, and they had been doing this for like 2 or 3 years and the kid had always just quietly ignored them. But this time when the lineman closed the book he was reading, the kid straight up channeled John faking Wick. The book hadn't even been closed completely when quiet kid grabbed the lineman's hair and slammed his face into the slate desk. Then he kicked the back of his knee in to drop the lineman and brought the lineman's face into quiet kid's knee 2 or 3 times. When the wide receiver who was behind him tried to step in, the quiet kid straight up kicked the stools we sat on towards the wide receiver, hitting him in the hip and tangled up his legs, and then he ran 2 steps towards the wide receiver, up the stool, 1 step and then onto the top of the stool, and kicked the wide receiver's face like he was on special teams. Turns out not only was quiet kid an urban explorer, read Early Parker, but was also fairly well trained in multiple hand-to-hand combat styles. His parents had been taking him to classes for 10 years. He just never thought those 2 were worth it. I'd love to say he left the room picking up the most popular girl in school on his way out, but he just tipped and was suspended for like a month. We became friends after that. I was the quiet kid in my class. In 9th grade, at the start of the year, I was working on a group project with 2 others. I finished 90% of my portion when blockheaded jock type decides he wants to switch roles. I refuse. He lightly shoved me and snatches the paper I stood up, grabbed my pencil pouch and slammed it on the desk. It has a T30 calculator in it. complete with hard shell, and made a very loud noise, and what we were working on required colored pencils, which resided in a currently unzipped pocket, freshly sharpened. The third person of this group was a pretty cool kid, and he was leaning on the back two of his chair at the time, and sitting between me and the blockhead, such that my slam caused him to be shotgunned with needle-sharp colored pencils and fall backwards, hitting his head on the table, and clattering to the floor. Meanwhile, I'm giving this kid the death glare. I say death glare, because the teacher immediately escorted me out of the room and kindly asked me not to look that way at people, because he was slightly surprised the other kid didn't just drop dead because of it. Thank heavens the cool kid was cool about it, and said that it was his fault he fell back, since he shouldn't be leaning in chairs like that anyways, because everyone else was convinced I obliterated him as a warning to the blockhead. Who, by the way, was an absolutely gentleman the rest of my high school career. Many people were. I was fairly well liked overall, but I had my own problems in high school, and didn't see that till much later, but respect for my boundaries? Born of a healthy fear for the rest of my high school career, I would still occasionally be approached. The incident. Someone else, another pretty cool kid, took it upon himself to engrave the events into myth, complete with a gradual exaggeration, until, in the final weeks of high school, it was said that I smote the kid from earth, knocked the cool kid flat when he saw my flaming eyes, and then brought the blockhead back in a rare act of mercy after the teacher bargained for his life. I have a pretty good story. When I went to high school, normally nobody gave a shit if a student was being bullied, even in front of prefects or other students. Usually you'd have to stand up for yourself. Standard stuff. So far there's this one odd quiet kid who had made it with us all the way to 5th year, the final year of school. No such thing as junior senior, etc. a year in Argentina, or I simply don't know the equivalent. Beats me. Tall, emaciated, kept to himself, but he was chill. Never messed with anybody. A scheduled set. Shed class rolls around after the bell rings. Quiet kid spent the entirety of recess being pushed around by this one guy whom we've always referred to as Dickhead. Yes, seriously, probably because his head really resembled a human glands, but it was mostly just an affectionate nickname. Also a cool dude, kind of the class's clown, always did some stupid shit that made us laugh. Somebody brings up a rumor that every time you masturbate, you basically end up killing a baby, as the sperm is incapable of fertilizing an egg outside of the female body. After a few moments, quiet kid speaks up. Dickhead must be a serial killer. If that's the case, I haven't laughed that hard in years, and I highly doubt I will ever be able to modulate my voice in such a way that allows me to create that degree of wails of utter amusement a second time. Classmates could definitely agree with that sentiment. It was a dumb joke, but we were dumb teenagers, so obviously it made us laugh. One of the best moments I lived in high school. We had a theater class I attended way back in middle school, and there was this girl that didn't really ever talk. It surprised me that she was even in theater, cause she didn't do much other than watch point for our final. We had to perform some kind of skit in front of the class. I forget what I did. I think it might have been part of the musical we were practicing. But this shy girl goes up, and she recited this scene from Caroline. Already you know it gets faked up, and she plays the part of the mother, the part where she screams and shit. It got really awkward, especially given how she didn't tell anyone what the fuck was reciting. She just went full in. At some point she pulled her sleeves up, and she showed her cutting marks and stuff. But it doesn't stop there. She joins the musical I was gonna perform in. Starts getting really touchy with me and stuff. I tell her to stop cause I've got a girlfriend, and I'm not interested. She asks for a pencil one day, comes back the next to tell me she masturbated with it, because it had my oils on it. Told me she rubbed my oils in her fresh cuts, so I could be a part of her. I don't know what happened to her past high school, and I'd rather not know. Kid named Milo who is very shy. He has great grades, and always listens and obeys but rarely talks. His silence probably comes from the torture that he had to go through growing up with stoned out drug dealers and thugs, but he has always refused to talk about it again, after he told me originally. Anyways, I was walking in the hall, and noticed Milo running in the halls, which is so against his usual act. He was talking to people and socializing too. I went to go talk to him because I was so happy for him being excited and breaking out of his shell. Conversation went like Milo, what's up, me, hey man what's going on, Milo, I don't know why, but I've been very happy me I saw a pill in his mouth and realized today was gonna be a disaster at class. He was very talkative. The teacher was about to play a video on the Revolutionary War and an ad popped up. It happened to be one of those stupid condom ad, and the teacher had stepped away from her computer to handle soap papers. Everyone in class was laughing quietly. Then Milo shouts, so I'ma need that tonight. Got me some big titty beaches today. He got in big trouble and was suspended for being high in class and causing a commotion. Okay, so super quiet guy moved to my school junior year. He was really tall, 6 feet 6 inches, really thin and lanky, wore baggy skater clothes. No skaters really at my school. Rarely talks, and over junior year he starts looking taller and he starts wearing seemingly baggier clothes. Enter senior year. It's football season, so pep rallies. At one pep rally they call down a football player, a tubby confident guy, and the quiet skater dude. The cheerleaders have concocted a game where they get the participants to show off their biggest muscle. Tubby guy goes first, revealing pretty impressive calf muscles. Cocky football player goes next and decides to just win it right there, so he rips off his shirt to show a decent set of pecs, big biceps, but a bit of a gut. All the girls hoop and holler, and it's fun and funny. Point then it was skater dude's turn. He looks over at the still shirtless football player and says into the mic being held by the cheerleader, "Okay," with a smirking nod. He whips off his shirt to reveal the most chiseled masculine form I have ever seen. Due to his height it appeared he had like 14 fucking abs. I swear I could see the muscle fibers in his triceps from the bleachers. It put the statue of David to shame. Point the crowd goes noticeably silent for a few seconds, then erupts with cheers from everyone. Girls, guys, teachers. Hell, even shirtless football player loved it. Turns out he did get a little taller, cause he started working out and countering his slouch. And he wore bigger baggier clothes to keep his same style just on a larger body. Point TLDR tall, skinny quiet new kid secretly buffs up over a year and reveals his perfect masculine form at pep rally to school-wide shock and awe. My husband was the quiet kid. He has selective mutism, and since he moved schools all of the time, people always tried talking to him. He never did for multiple reasons. But one day, when we were on the phone, he said he pronounced Arkansas as a Kansas when reading out loud in class. I would died, but he literally didn't even know he said it wrong until I told him. Point when we were in the same college math class, he asked the math teacher if we could do the problem an easier way than she was showing us. He's really smart, scored a 5 on the app calculus exam. He then proceeded to explain it to her. I didn't understand anything, but she seemed taken aback that he seemed to figure that out. And everyone was completely silent because he had never talked to anyone besides me. He also communicated through me, and he had never raised his hand. Point. And if you're wondering how he started talking to me, we were in a RLDR for 2.5 years. It took me forever to get him to talk to me on the phone, even longer to Skype me. But he's totally comfortable with me now, and I'm the only one he's comfortable with since he moved away from his family. Selective mutism can be really sad, and I'm sure a lot of the quiet kids suffer, and maybe still suffer, from it. Back in high school, I was the quiet kid. I was, and still am, really into history and social science. So naturally, those other courses I took. Point well, the majority of the other smart kids in my school took the sciences, biology, chemical, physics, ECT, leaving said history courses populated with everyone else, meaning a mix of the underachieves, druggies, and all around dumbass. Well, one day, our teacher assigned us a debate, splitting the class into 2 teams. The teams were to debate which was the superior palace of classical Greece, Athens or Sparta. I was assigned to Sparta. I could recognize that nobody on my team would be useful in their allocated subcategory, military, economy, political structure, ECT, so I picked up the slack and researched a bit of every topic. Point the weekend passes, and so comes the debate. Me, along with a team of 8 people who I'm certain did nothing, facing off against a team of 9, who did little to nothing. Point I handed in great work, but was really quiet, so nobody expected me to be of much use. I went ahead to debate 9 people on my own, proceeding to crush them in every category. I planned my points ahead of time, placing emphasis on the failure of Athenian democracy and its contrast with Spartan stability. Point after that day, people in the class really wanted help with homework a lot more. AWW man, my best friend was the quiet kid. Always a little weird, like digging holes during recess, nose picking while talking to you. Just a good all-around socially challenged 10-year-old. Well, during the standardized testing one year, the kid sitting behind my buddy was tapping his chair with his foot. Well, who wants their desk shaken during a test? My buddy raises his hand and waits for the teacher to come by, and the teacher says from his desk, hands down during the test. Tapping intensifies. Buddy has had it, turns around and yells at tapper. Classroom turns to watch. Teacher stands up and yells at Buddy to be quiet or his test will be thrown away. Buddy tries to explain. Teacher just shuts him up and goes back to whatever he was doing. Buddy sits back facing the front. Tapper goes back to tapping. Point. Buddy in one swift magical moment was up and tipped over the desk of Tapper. Liked poured him out a pot of tea, then heaves the empty desk at the teacher's desk, and then he just started crying uncontrollably. I, like the rest of the class and teacher and Tapper, were all in a state of shock that this quiet, slightly chubby kid could throw a desk a good 10 feet. Teacher recovered first and walked Buddy out to probably the nurse's office, but I don't really remember anything other than the Tapper kid asking if my buddy was going to beat him up and the class laughing at the teacher's reaction. This kid wasn't as quiet as some of the kids people have told stories of, but nonetheless the story is great. So this kid hardly talked to anyone, always sat on his tablet and played like faking survival craft or something. So we are in gym one day doing the pacer test, and because of the size of the gym we do it into groups. So I was in the first group, so we run our whole thing and then go off to the side to sit and cool down. This kid had left to go run and then quit like 10 laps in, so he comes back. Well, his spot was taken by another kid, so I just happened to look over and hear, "Get out of my spot, you left. Plus there's a lot of other spots. Just go sit there, but this is my spot and I don't care." Well, that didn't sit well with him, and since the kid who had taken his spot had his legs spread because it's hot and he's trying to cool off, the quiet kid faking heel stomps this guy's balls like 4 times. Now first off, shout out to the guy getting his balls crushed because he acted like a man, but I was like, RIP his kids. Coach comes over and sends this kid out of class, and he didn't get suspended. To this day me and my friends still think it's because admin thinks he would have shot up the school, which is why they didn't suspend or expel him. That was a few years ago now. He ended up leaving about a year or so later. Our quiet kid was low-key brilliant and came from a family of just exceptionally smart people. When QK's brother was being ridiculed by one of the bullies during assembly while getting an award for being insane intelligent, our QK became a faking assassin. Bit of background: the high school bully was a mental size 6, 3 or 4 and just built with those scary eyes and everything. You kept a low profile around him. Our teachers even kept their distance a bit. Our QK on the other hand was below average height, slight build, etc. So QK's brother is copying it whilst Onstage and Noon is doing anything. Some teachers are doing the whole James, now that's enough, but he's not stopping. QK's brother is obviously getting upset, and then QK leaps into it. He's 3 aisles in front of the bully and straight in front of him, and suddenly he's leaped those aisles to go the bully. Sword over my head and headbutts the bully square in the face. QK barely flinches after the impact and rips the bully's jumper in front of his face and works shots into the bully's gut. Bully lands a lucky blind hit and sends the kid back, and he just shakes it off like nothing happened. This is in the assembly, by the way. Teachers, chairs, and kids everywhere, and everyone has just parted for this brawl. QK comes straight at him again. The bully has his shirt back down, and this kid lands the most perfect "This is Sparta." This is in the early 2000s before the movie 2. Front kick in his chest and the bully is sent reeling. The bully starts whimpering, "Why won't anyone do anything?" And then it was all over. The bully kinda just became James after that, and the QK still didn't say much after either. RQK became known as the kid who vanquished the bully, and when he returned from his suspension he was cheered when he came in the morning's assembly and he smiled. First time anyone saw it happen, and that was it. James came back a few days later and just became a kinda normal, albeit huge, dude who graduated the next year. One day the quiet kid said to the teacher that a bully is throwing things at him. Teacher said then hit him back. So he hit him back. Hard. Knocked the shitty kid out cold. Did I mention the quiet kid was basically a gentle giant? Huge dude with a heart of gold. Teacher was mad at first, but the quiet kid said you told me to hit back. The bully was fine when he woke up, and luckily his parents were just mad at their son for bullying. Unfortunately it just made the bully less physical and more verbal, which the teachers never really did anything about. He would constantly mock people for the most unholy reasons. Because they were Hispanic, gay, Jewish, or disabled, either mentally or physically. Got a few other kids suspended when they reacted to his daily verbal abuse with a physical outburst, at which point he would go to a teacher and cry/exaggerate injury. I only saw them a couple times in passing, but I recall his parents seeming like good people, scolding him for bullying, and never defending his actions. Remember me mentioning he mocked disabled kids? Well, guess whose sister was in a wheelchair that he made fun of? The gentle giant, who by this time of his senior year had a lot of friends now, was very much well liked. When bully started making fun of his paraplegic sister, the tone shifted dramatically. He wasn't just an annoying bully anymore. He was seen as an unholy abomination who dared walk among men. A few days later bully was riding his bike and got hit by a car, which also backed over his legs. Dunno if it was on purpose or accident, but supposedly the car just drove off. From what I understood, they never found out who did it, but the bully said it was a dark pickup, like gentle giant drove, but apparently GG had the alibi of 3 friends, and one of those friends' parents, that he was halfway across town when it happened. The whole thing seemed a bit fishy, and of course kids were rumoring that GG did it, but ever since making fun of the wheelchair girl, pretty much everyone hated the bully. He was in crutches the rest of the year, and he became the quiet kid. Not as good of a story as some of the others, but I'll give it a go. It wasn't very mature, but it was the 9th grade, so what ya gonna do? This kid in my class was basically a real proper as jerk to anyone who wasn't traditionally normal. Me and this other kid were often the victim cause we were the only ones in that class who were very obviously different metalheads, and we looked it. This other metalhead was always really quiet in class, however could be quite loud when surrounded by the other metalheads in schools, so basically when he was more in his element. So this one class the quiet metalhead and the jerk were for some reason sitting next to each other, and the jerk was really taking advantage of that fact. I mean, he was piling it on him. Just kept on ripping into the quiet metalhead's outfit, music, hair, you name it. He made fun of it. After a good while the metalhead, without any other warning, stabbed the dude with a pen. Of course the jerk immediately tried to play the victim with the teacher, but the teacher wasn't buying any of it, knowing what the dude was like. Jerk had the ink spot for as long as I can remember, at least for the remainder of high school. TLDR, Jerk kept ripping into metalhead relentlessly. One class, metalhead stabbed him with a pen. Teacher didn't give a shit. Ink spot remained for years, at least. Didn't see him again after high school, so I don't know if it's still there, but I feel like it is. A friend of mine was the quiet kid. Well, one day during freshman year of high school, quiet friend gets bored. We had gone to work in our school's computer lab that day and we were lazily doing work when he grabs my attention and shows me the screen. He'd downloaded some sort of program off of the Google Chrome store that made all CS a B, and he downloaded another that made all BS a. For example, he googled Bakersfield, California, and the screen showed Bakersfield, California. We proceeded to spend the rest of the class period laughing our butts off at the sheer silliness of the joke, and then left. The next day, our class is addressed personally by the principal. They had done some detective work and somehow figured out that the program had to have been downloaded by someone in our class. Now, by this point pretty much our entire grade had heard of his ridiculous prank and knew it was him. It was a struggle not to laugh when we were being treated as if we were murder suspects. On top of all that, our principal blew it way out of proportion. She went into how this was disrespectful and inappropriate, and how we wasted the it guy's time because he had to figure out how to delete the virus. At this point, quiet friend leans over to me and says, "I got it for free from the Chrome store." It probably took him all of 2 minutes to turn off. We spent the next few weeks referring to him as our high school's very own hacker man. It was really just so silly to watch it blow up like that, and nice to know that no one ever ratted him out. Now, this requires some context. I'm in a program for people with Asperger's syndrome at my school. It's not a special ed facility, exactly, just for students with a mild case of autism who need some accommodation. There's this one kid in the program. He's this short, kinda stocky kid with thick rimmed glasses and large puffy curly hair. Let's call him Sam. Now, I've known Sam since middle school, and, if you see him in class, he'll usually be pretty reserved. He tends to keep to himself, and will sometimes even request his desk to be on its own, not grouped in any tables or anything. He usually won't talk to you, unless you know him very well, like, for example, I do point, when you get to talk to Sam, you'll come to understand that he has a very nihilistic view on life. He's literally said to me before that he doesn't expect to live that long after high school. He has talked quite a bit to me and other program students about his many bizarre and extravagant ideas, whether it be an entirely new political system no one else could ever think up, or an interesting but outlandish philosophical idea. For example, he's on a Discord server that a fellow program friend and I run, and a while back, he sent a message stating, "I would gladly kill all humans if it were not for the fact that if I did that then I would have no way to watch content on YouTube, television, or books, and floating around on a rock in space is rather boring, for the laws of the imagination are limitless while physics, however, are not." Also, occasionally, when he's in a class that he's interested in with a teacher he trusts, he'll make remarks in class. He'll talk about the topic at hand, make comparisons, and even crack a few jokes. But he never seems to be doing it to facilitate discussion or to make people laugh. He seems to do it because that's just who he is. A guy with a brain so full of weird strange stuff that he just can't keep it all to himself. But I'm almost certainly not describing it correctly. Sam's mind is a confusing mystery that no one but he can ever comprehend. So good on you, Sam. Thank you for being my introverted, nihilistic but hilarious friend for the past 6 years. JFC, I can't believe it's actually been that long. I had a quiet Asian friend growing up. I would be more specific, but on different occasions he told us Laos, Cambodia, China, Japan, etc. all with a straight face. I think cause he thought it was funny. English class senior year. New teacher integrates journaling twice a week. Class ends up going along with it. Cut to end of the school year. We stopped writing in the journals around March, and they were kept in the cabinet in the back of the classroom. About the second week of May, Asian friend raises his hand. Mrs. Antonio, I wanted to check some stuff I wrote in my journal, and I can't seem to find them." She initially laughs, then really quickly starts panicking. Now Asian friend is starting to get worked up. "Mrs. Antonio, I never wanted to write in that journal. All my private thoughts. All our private thoughts. Where are they?" Teacher starts crying. Class in chaos. She has to leave. We have the assistant principal, the rest of the class after class. Me and a couple of my buddies went up to our Asian friend and said, "Dude, what the hell do you have him there? Why were you freaking out?" "Oh, nothing, I didn't have one. I did throw everyone else's in the river though. TLDR, funniest kid I have ever met, seeks justice in unique way. Soaks journals in the cheeks of a fresh teacher." I would consider myself the quiet kid in class while I thrive on the internet, so I might boost my ego by doing this, but here we go anyway. So there was this really annoying kid that everyone, except his friends, hated. I don't know how it came up, but we were all comparing ourselves now to how we were the previous school year, and this kid literally describes in perfect detail every single annoying feature about himself that he said he used to have. So then I say, "So like you are now?" The kid is kind of shocked and flustered at me for a couple seconds, then looks at me with denial. And keep in mind, though it may seem like it without the context I'm about to inform you with, this kid was not your stereotypical jock bully kid. He was very social and very popular and very annoying, but he never bullied anyone. He was actually quite feminine. This got a couple laughs, but nothing insane. Not like this one quiet weird kid no one knows or cares about all of a sudden changes everyone in the classroom's lives. But I said enough to be recognized by a couple people, and that's really all I ask. When it comes to social recognition, the teacher was actually walking by our table when I said it and agreed with me. So yeah, that's my story. I think I have a lot more crazier examples, but none I can remember off the top of my head. I believe I was in my junior year of high school. We had a substitute teacher in English. I was quiet, but could also be a really sarcastic, brutally honest teenager. This class was normally pretty chill, as long as the regular teacher was there. I was on my period at the time and really needed to use the restroom. I calmly raise my hand and ask for permission. Denied. I sit there thinking, how much of an asshole this guy is? About 5 minutes later, I raise my hand and ask him again. Denied. Now I'm getting to emergency level. I feel sick. My cramps are so bad that I feel like I'm going to vomit. Enough of this bullshit, I thought. I grab my bag, calmly stand up, and push my chair in, and walk to the front of the room. I hop up onto the table in the front. He notices this pretty quickly and walks over. I need the restroom, I tell him. He tells me no again. I clear my throat. At this point, my friends and the rest of the class are drawn to the ruckus that is unfolding. Either you let me use the restroom, or I'm going to be forced to take care of business in the trash can. My language was not nearly as polite at this point, and I'm pretty sure I mixed a few well-placed curse words into this third request. His jaw dropped to the floor. Not only was I excused to go use the restroom, I didn't bother going back and went to sit in the front office with the secretary, who was one of the sweetest ladies. I think it turned into a thing, as he never subbed for that particular class again. 6th grade. Quiet kid, kinda on fringe of most social circles. New kid. Super smart all around, but really liked math. Comes to school one day, gives our first block teacher a note. Teacher reads note, nods, gives it back to kid. Middle of class, kid just gets up and leaves class. This never happens. Nobody just leaves. We all change classes as a class. We all go to the bathroom as a class. Lockers were in homeroom, where we currently were. Teacher said nothing. Just let him go. Never seen it before. Ever. We were hardly ever allowed out of our seat without permission, much less the room. Anyways, kid comes back. Nothing happens. Nobody asks him, and he doesn't say anything. Second block. Same thing. Note to teacher. Teacher does something affirmative in response. At some point in class, kid just leaves. Third block. Same thing. It is so strange. In each class he just quietly gets up and leaves the room and comes back to class sometime later. At some point I think we figure out that maybe he isn't feeling well and has obtained permission to use the bathroom when he needs to without waiting to ask. Fourth block. Math class. Note to teacher. Note returned. Couple minutes later kid screams, "Oh god, why now?" and slams his pencil down and runs out the door. I remember his name. Before I graduated high school my mom said she ran into his mom somewhere. Said they moved again. They were originally not from the US. Found a new school. Got the kid some meds. And then he became a class president or something. Hope he's well. There was this guy in high school that I shared some classes with. He was, with all kindness, an odd one. From what I gathered his parents were hippie bikers. His given name was supposedly Mac, but he had chosen to go by the name Sylvester. This was a private Catholic school with a dress code, but on rare occasions we would be allowed to wear whatever we wanted, within reason. Most of us would wear jeans, t-shirts, the usual teenager gear. Sylvester would arrive in a 3-piece suit. I remember him being reserved, not shy, but the kind of person who thought for a long time before saying anything. We shared an US history class with a teacher who, in hindsight, was deeply incompetent. She assigned ridiculous amounts of busy work and had no sense of timing when it came to the class, so we were always woefully behind, which she was always stressed out about and tended to take out on her students. I don't know that any of us liked her. We were taking a pop quiz that had something to do with the Constitution when we had all handed our papers and she told us the answers to the questions. Sylvester stopped her after one of the answers she gave and politely told her that that couldn't be the answer had to be this other thing. She started laying into him, insisting that she was correct and it was too bad that he had gotten the answer wrong, but that she was definitely right. He looked at her calmly, stood up, said, "You're wrong," in a firm voice, and then reached into his backpack and pulled out what looked to be a handwritten, aged replica of the Constitution out of his backpack. He looked at it briefly, found the part he was looking for, and showed it to her. He was right. She had gotten the answer to her own question wrong. None of us ever figured out why he had the actual Constitution in his backpack. I would kinda alternate between being virtually silent and never shutting the fuck up, but I have a few gems from my junior year of high school exercise in very small Spanish class, where we have to say what material our hypothetical line of clothing is made from. I was the last to go, and all the other materials were already used. I kinda panicked and responded piel de humano, or human skin. That kinda became a recurring joke in that class. English class was asked the rhetorical question, what are friends for? In the midst of love, compassion, trust and strength, I muttered spare parts. The girl in front of me heard that, looked at me in horror, and never spoke to me again. Spanish class plays Scrabble in Spanish. When there's no lesson plan, partner up with equally quiet friend. We won every game because we'd either find the most absurd words to use or would pull complete dick moves like putting an S at the end of another team's word. Annoying popular girl is having a borderline meltdown in English class that ends with her yelling, "I faking hate you all." I was more annoyed than anything, so I responded by muttering a quote from Family Guy. The two people immediately surrounding me begin choking, trying not to laugh. Their friends ask what happened. They repeat the quote, and so on and so forth until everyone sans the original girl is choking back laughter. Everyone finally settles down. There's a single second of silence, and then everyone bursts out laughing. Was tasked with taking headshots of the Spanish teacher for a website, and decided that I needed a photo conveying revulsion for some reason. After the first 2 photos, I called out, "Oh yeah, work it baby, work it." The resulting look of disgust and confusion was magnificent, and was immortalized in the resulting photo to everyone's delight. Got annoyed during a pre-calculus test, since the teacher failed to teach us anything relevant to the course, so I literally pulled out my textbook and studied from it mid-exam. The teacher, naturally, gave 0 sheets, and I got an A. Launched a 1-pound weight through the ceiling in a basics of mechanical engineering course, leaving a hole for the next 2 years. I honestly have no idea if they ever even made plans to replace that particular tile. Autistic, 1A bully in art class is openly bragging about having faked a girl the night before, and how we are all losers for not even getting close to that level. Proceeds to describe how the girl was an absolutely disgusting, revile piece of human garbage that he wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, and I respond by poking my head around the sculpture I'm working on and yelling, "That's a terrible thing to say about your mother." He tries to retort, gets off a "yeah, well," and then proceeds to sprint down the hall and went home. I was the quiet kid. I usually just ignored bullies and insults since I was too busy and it wasn't worth my time. Come senior year, I finally decided that the next person that said something to me that was bad enough, I was gonna kick the shit out of them. These 2 kids, though, it would be funny to say something about my family, so I told them to stop. Gave them 3 warnings in full view of everyone around me. As soon as one of them laid a hand on me, I took them both down, and in my 17-year-old adrenaline rush I stomped on the hand of one of them. I'm 300 pounds, fat, but I'm muscular and tall. Take a guess as to what happened. I had friends and was in good standings with my teachers and principals who vouched for me, so I was only out of school for a few days. Here's a couple tips in dealing with bullies. The 3 warning rule. Give them 3 warnings, and if they don't stop, knock him out. Try not to strike first. Self-defense is a prickly issue, so if you can avoid striking first, then that makes your case all the better. Point: make friends with everyone. You should definitely make friends with reliable people that would vouch for you in these types of situations, or even befriending teachers. I myself am a very quiet kid. Mostly because I'm insane. So a bit of backstory. In 6th my middle school got shut down because of lack of funding, so I had to move to a new middle school to finish my 7th and 8th grade year. Fast forward into the middle of my 8th grade year, still the quiet kid. I decided to bring a laser pointer to school because it also had a little tip that acts as a touch pen for iPad and iPhone. A good friend of mine asks me what it is, and I tell him it's a laser pointer / pen. During a lesson I got bored and decided to play around with it. I pointed at the ceiling, wall, smartboard, you name it. I get called up to the teacher's desk for something. Spoiler alert, it's not because of the laser pointer. While the teacher is looking down and explaining some stuff about my essay, I point the laser at my friend who notices it, and I start laughing. Don't worry, he does also. I continue do that to my other friends until the teacher looks at me with a poker face. Meanwhile I'm laughing and quickly hiding the pen. The teacher asks me what's so funny and quickly save myself by making up an excuse. I explained that I remembered a joke a friend did during my sporting event, and it was pretty funny. The teacher bought and smiled as well. The teacher looks down, and my friends break down laughing and crying. Never this Joey kid to be such a genius / funny guy. To me, I think it was the best thing I have ever done. Hope you enjoyed. I will be describing dialogue exchanged by my teacher and my friend / the quiet kid. I'll do my best to recall from memory of the event. Point: this is a recent experience that happened. I'm friends with this kid in my class that I will call Jay. He is extremely quiet all that time, but when he does talk it's usually about art. It's clear he hasn't come out of his shell quite yet. Anyway, we were doing a reading of the book called The Giver, and it is very obvious he isn't in a good mood. When it gets to his turn he does something that I never could have imagined he'd do. He's doodling in his sketchbook and the teacher calls on him. He doesn't answer. Teacher: Jay, we're reading. Stop drawing and start reading. Jay picks up an open book without saying a word. Teacher: you haven't been following along at all. You need to start listening in my class or else you will fail my class. Jay: sorry, I've been listening at least. Jay is clearly aggravated, and so is the teacher at this point. Teacher: it doesn't matter if you were listening. It matters that you follow along. Jay at this point is severely and visibly angry because he usually doesn't get this kind of confrontation. Jay: I do not have to sit here and listen to this. Teacher: that's gonna be a referral and your parents will be hearing from me later tonight. The kid Jay proceeds to get out of his desk, knock over the massive stand of books next to him. I assume it was on purpose, and on his way out of class he flips a desk over before kicking the door open to make his way down the hall for student services. I go to a very ghetto school, so he got some sort of form of street credit after this. We are almost through the school year and I kinda wanna see if he'll do it again before summer break. Quiet kid. Honey, I was the quiet kid. So, I have a lot of instances where I, the quiet kid, or according to my class advisor, the good kid, said that I got a lot of reactions and more than I expected. So strap in my guys. So, it was science class and we were out of the classroom in our school lab, and cutting onions, and putting them under a microscope. I hated the onion smell, by the way, so I stuck my head out the open lab door every now and then for fresh air. So like any lab project, we worked in groups and this group consisted of Op me see my crush ag annoying kid ag annoying girl JG half Japanese girl ag and JG aren't that important to this story and I knew JG back in, I believe, 3rd or 4th grade way before 7th grade, which is when this story took place, and ag was just my annoying seatmate. Crush and I were casual friends with common interests and I developed feelings for him over time, but still treated him as a casual friend. Point: anyway, Alaska was looking under the microscope and I was waiting my turn to look, and he was purposefully extending his time and annoying me by his words. I may be the quiet kid, but I will still stab you my words. So, Alaska was just annoying me and exaggerating how cool the onion cells looked under the microscope. C was on his right and I was on his left, and Crush was taking notes and stuff, while I was just chilling and waiting my turn, when I just snapped. Ak was just annoying me to no means end while C was telling me to calm down and ignore him, and then I spoke. Op putang in RMOC, oh my god. Op can curse in Tagalog. By the way, I live in the Philippines and a full-blooded Filipino, but spoke English as a first language, but can still understand and speak Tagalog/Filipino, and I, of course, knew some curse words in there, so if you're curious to what I said means, just go to Google Translate and type puta in Spanish and it'll translate for you. Ina means mother, by the way, and mo is sort of a prefix thing. I don't know. Spanish and Filipino are also very similar in some aspects, so that's why just go Spanish to English. So C wasn't that loud, but just loud for it to be sort of shouting, but not everyone in the room heard it, and he even backed up a bit when he heard me, and Ak was also fairly shocked and moved a bit, while I kept a straight face, and then calmly said a few minutes afterwards in my sweetest tone possible, "Op, are you done yet?" Ak didn't say anything, and just moved out the seat he was in, and I took it, and had my turn. If you're wondering where Ag and JG was, we had to cut the onions and JG was the one cutting them, and she accidentally cut herself and Ag went back to the classroom to take care of it and were not present, but I'm pretty sure C told them cause. JG asked me when we were heading back to the classroom, "JG, who taught you that?" And she knew that I knew that she was referring to the words I said to Ak, and I replied, "Op shrugs casually the internet," then walked ahead of her and went about the rest of the day. A shorter one was when we were in first period in our different groups and I just muttered the F word as my notebook fell off my armchair, and after I quickly put it back on my chair. My classroom friend who I met this school year was rather surprised, since this was the first time hearing me curse, and told me to watch my language, and I sheepishly apologized, quietly pointing out, "Yeah, I know this isn't the first time I ever cursed in the classroom, right?" Didn't really get a reaction, and she sort of just ignored it, and was still surprised. Those are the one I can recall, and being the quiet kid in my class was very handy when our advisor got mad at us, but never at me specifically. There were times I got in trouble for other things, but that's a story for another time. This is actually a horror story from a cadet camp I went to, but it was terrifying to hear. So there was this albino kid, we will call him Powder. Typical quiet nerd who got bullied a lot. The guy who bullied him was a terrible person. Let's call him Elijah, because I hate that name. It was a survival camp, so sometimes they had to go for weeks on end without showering, and Elijah would put crap into the Powder's sleeping bag, where he would go to sleep and be covered from head to toe in sheet. Mostly about the fact that Powder's eyes were red. That is a thing that can happen to albino people. Sometimes it got physical, and I mean really bad. Just not bad enough to get rotted. Powder took his own life and nobody realized it until the week of their solos. I guess you could call it a final exam. Elijah's day goes as normal. He made a fire, put up his lean-to, and in the trees he sees something red, but when he looks back it is gone. He has to stay up for a while at night to watch his fire, and he sees the red things again. They are far away, poking out from behind a tree. Elijah is terrified. He is petrified. Eventually he passes out from exhaustion and is woken up by a staff cadet wondering why he wasn't watching his fire. Elijah doesn't want to seem crazy, so he just said he got too tired and fell asleep. He got 0 marks for that day. The next night he is awake at his fire and sees the red things again. This time they are about 10 meters away from his sight. They are definitely eyes. He passes out again, and the same cadet wakes him up. 0 marks again. Today he is too terrified to do anything but sit by his tent and whimper. Tonight he is 100% alert and searching for the eyes, and for the next few days he finds nothing. The last night before their final inspection, Elijah decides it was nothing after all and goes to bed, resigning himself for failure in the course. He is woken up by a sound. He opens his eyes and right at the end of his shelter is the eyes. It was a staring contest. The loser would die. Elijah lost, but he wasn't dead. Yet the next day everyone had to pack up and leave their sites. Elijah is not hesitant at all and wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. They are sent to the barracks to get showered and have a day off. Before they were told the results of the solos the next morning, everyone is woken by a bugle and are excited to get going. Everyone except Elijah. He was still in bed with his covers up over his face. His bunkmate tells him to get up and ready. He doesn't budge. Finally he removes the covers and finds that Elijah's face was whiter than powder and his eyes were solid red. Powder got the last laugh. I knew him in college, and we called him Stumbly Futzbottom. Not to his face, of course, because that would have been mean. He was a giant of a dude, both in height and in weight. He got his name when we were getting trained on how to set up the cameras that we could check out from the equipment cage, and he tripped over a tripod and very nearly destroyed a handful of many thousands of dollars video cameras. Only some quick reflexes from the people standing nearby kept it from being a complete disaster. He never went out of his way to engage with anyone, not even the professors from what I saw. Nor did he really cultivate the kind of appearance that made anyone want to talk to him. I think he owned maybe 3 ratty polo shirts that he wore in rotation, and any food stains that showed up on these shirts would remain there for up to a couple weeks. He never shaved and rarely showered. When he was in class he would listen to the lectures, do the lab work by himself, and when he left the labs he must have gone straight back to his dorm room, because I don't remember ever seeing him around the computer labs, or out at the bars or the coffee shops, etc. The only time I did see him outside of the classrooms was when I saw him at the cafeteria, adding more stains to the Rorschach diagram that was his shirt. One day we were standing in line at the equipment cage to check out cameras to shoot one of our projects. I was in a small group, just chatting and passing the time with a few friends while we were waiting to get our gear. Stumbly was behind us. One of my friends was complaining about how his portable hard drive wasn't mounting anymore, and he was going to lose his projects, when Stumbly piped up from behind, "I bet you just got beated with a weasel." As one we turned to look at him, and I was wondering if there was going to be any follow-up to that comment. There was not. Just a blank look from Stumbly, and a return to his silence. We were quiet for a moment longer, but then conversation resumed, and that was the last I heard out of old Stumbly. I don't remember if I saw him graduate, and for the life of me, I cannot remember his real name, so he's a mystery that will remain such forever, I guess. 5th grade. We got a new kid, started a few months late, super smart quiet kid, always finished quizzes/tests early, picked up sports really fast/well. He was surprisingly strong, though he didn't show it off. Could have been popular, but didn't seem all that interested in making many friends. So, of course the school bullies eventually got interested. Before class, during break/lunch, and after classes the main block-headed and thick-shouldered bully would give him a hard time, plus about 10 of his cronies. You could tell that he was holding back against the bullies. Mostly, he'd stay on defense. One day during lunch break the bully took it too far. Had his crew dogpile the quiet kid. Then the main bully kicked him in the face. Holy moly, the look on the quiet kid's face as he processed the kick to his face, and his lips started bleeding. That was a scary ever-loving scary face. He looked different. A different kind of quiet. Even the main bully paused as he was going to deliver another kick. The quiet kid said, very calmly, and dead calm clear, "You aren't going to be using your feet tomorrow." The kids on him wanted to laugh or such, but the way he said it, they didn't. He pulled himself out, and no one stopped him, and he walked into the forest area that was behind the school. I watched all this from a bench 50 feet away in a group of tables for outdoor lunch, etc. Skip ahead to after classes, kids waiting for parents to pick them up. The school bus is not yet on site. Main bully usually walks home late, hanging in front of the school with his crew. Me, waiting off to the side waiting for my father to pick me up, talking to a few friends. I blinked, and the quiet kid kinda came out of nowhere. One of the things some of the other kids also didn't like about him, up until then, was how fast he was, and quiet he moved too. Unsettling. Like a small stealthy adult. Wrapping it up, he had a long branch, kind of a medium-sized piece in his hands, and boom, he swung it right into the middle of the main bully's chest. Raised him off the ground. Sent him back to slam on the ground. The impact basically shattered the tree branch. The quiet kid went over to the main bully, said, "How do you like getting kicked?" then proceeded to kick stomp the bully's legs. None of the other crew members stopped him, probably due to the super scary look in his face. The main bully was out school 3 glorious months, with broken legs. Saw him around town in a wheelchair for a while. Made me laugh, since he was such a creep. Since he was basically a jerk to everyone. Everyone was way happier while he was out, even his crew, who kind of splintered apart and became less douchey. The quiet kid was suspended a month, and only due to the principal being a really nasty lady. No one ratted out the quiet kid, so she punished him the maximum she could without witnesses, and oddly after he came back, he started talking a lot and being openly fun, and was one of the popular kids for the next couple years. Became my friend. The bully never bullied there again. He flinched and looked away whenever the no longer quiet kid was around. Found out the main bully went to jail and died there, and that was that. Where are you now? Foot stomping not quiet kid. Not in class, but point when me and my buddies were freshmen. We got made fun of for our skinny pants, skaters in 2007. The seniors at high school made fun of our buddy Ryan for his pants, saying he looked like he was walking chopsticks. He is 5 foot 10 inches and about 135 some odd pounds, so they weren't wrong objectively. But anyways, these seniors were varsity football and cokeheads, and the main dude was probably 220 pounds and 6 foot 1. So we decide our friends verse them. So later that week, we are at the place all the people meet up at. Like 15 to 20 little freshman runts. Myself 5 foot 1 and 95 pounds. And many others not much larger. They roll up 5 Vicks deep. Full faking football team point anyways. Seeing as it's not my fight, and I'm just backup buddies are talking sheet. They are talking sheet. Etc. 10 minutes later, still not fighting point. The people at the place tell us to leave point, so as we begin to walk away, and everyone's still talking sheet. I yell to the leader they have the problem with us, yet they won't hit us. All faking talk. Keep in mind, I'm 5 foot 1 to his 6 foot 1. And he has 120 pounds at least on me point. I'm a literal twig point. He comes closer, asks me what I said, while simultaneously striking the fear of God into me as he basically tossed me into the ground like below. I stood up point, clenched my fist point, and then my buddy who started the whole thing point yells my name point, saving me from my death point. The smallest, quietest, nicest kid there point about died over a comment on skinny jeans. Lol. TLDR, Apple's got a kid stabbed point. There was a quiet kid in our class, we'll call him Calvin. He was always very strange, and would sometimes murmur strange things about reaching levels, and the levels were called different fruits and vegetables. Calvin said he was on this level, that was some vegetable, broccoli or something. Ike. My friends and I never made fun of him. Sometimes we try to talk to him about these levels, but other kids definitely picked on him about it. Because it was pretty well known to our 8th, 10th grade classes that Calvin was an introvert and believed life was some game about reaching these produce levels point. I remember we stopped asking him about it one day when we asked him to explain them, because we asked about the highest levels, and he said something to the effect of oranges, then apples, then pineapples, and when we asked him what happened when he reached pineapples, he said everybody dies, and kinda laughed to himself. So, obviously we stopped pushing after that point anyway. A couple weeks later, he was getting picked on during a lab in science class by his 2 lab partners. One of his partners was calling him names and egging him on about the fruits and vegetables, and as the lab partner went to adjust a slide underneath a microscope, Calvin took a pen and stabbed that boy in the faking hand. As the kid screamed and yelled for the teacher, Calvin just looked at the kid's hand, with a pen all the way through the meaty part of his hand, smiled, and said apples point. We were dumb kids, and although scared AF, never told anyone about Calvin's explanation of the top levels. Fortunately, he never got to pineapples. I've tried to look up Calvin on social media and stuff, but he either doesn't use them, or he ended up in some kind of serious trouble, because I've never been able to locate him point. But yeah, that was scary as hell. Apples. When I was in 5th grade, there were these 2 guys in my class. Tyler was a little sheet, and Michael was a really quiet, awkward kid who generally got described as really smart, but really shy. These many years later, I realize he was most likely on the Asperger's/autism spectrum. One day Tyler and Michael were playing games on the computer at the back of the room. At that moment there was only one chair in front of the computer. This shouldn't have been a problem, because there were plenty of free chairs nearby that could be brought over, but Tyler, as stated earlier, was a little sheet, and decided that he absolutely had to sit in that specific chair, which Michael was already sitting in. He tried badgering Michael to give up the chair, and when that didn't work he physically pulled Michael out of the chair, and shoved him against the wall. The wall there wasn't just a plain wall. There were old built-in lockers installed there, and when Michael was shoved against them the handle of one of those lockers caught him in the middle of the back. Obviously, that hurt. And sweet, awkward, quiet little Michael went faking berserk. He grabbed Tyler by the shirt, swung him into the lockers, and started punching him as hard and as fast as a bookworm 11-year-old could. So, not very, but it definitely caught Tyler off guard. After a few swings Tyler started fighting back, and they quickly ended up on the ground, rolling around, grappling, kicking, and throwing wild punches, while the rest of the class just stood around and stared in absolute shock, because not only had Michael just gotten into a physical fight, it looked like he was winning. This lasted for about as long as it took the teacher to cross the room. The teacher pulled them both to their feet. They kept fighting. The teacher then physically placed himself between them. They kept fighting, throwing punches around the teacher at each other. The teacher finally grabbed Michael's wrists with one hand and Tyler's collar with the other, and marched them out of the room, and, I can only assume, down to the principal's office. Tyler was suspended for a week, Michael for 2 days. Michael's social status at school immediately jumped from that weird kid to one of the cool kids, and Tyler, the little sheet, gave him a very wide berth for the rest of the year. This kid in 7th grade was always quiet, and in homeroom he'd get bullied daily by another guy for wearing the same pants every day. We later found out, because he was poor and couldn't afford new clothes. Our teacher never really did anything, because she was young and kind of timid. So one day he's minding his own business and the guy starts badgering him about how he's wearing the same pants yet again. Then when the bully turned his back on him, the kid leaps out of his chair and full on pants the bully, while yelling same dumbass jokes every day. And the entire class laughed at the bully instead. Lol, it was so surreal. The guy never really bothered him again, because he was so embarrassed. Later on, he was still a quiet guy through high school, but pretty well liked by most people. We were in a creative writing class together, and he always wrote really cool sci-fi short stories. One day the teacher was trying to encourage another student, a girl, to write a romance story for some reason. She was describing how the student would one day meet a man she would fall madly in love with, and she'd become a dedicated wife and maybe she should write about that. The student wasn't into it, and she was like, that's not really my thing, and the teacher was like, but don't you want a dazzling young man to sweep you off your feet and be your husband one day? Immediately, the same quiet guy said very loudly and pointedly, she's gay. And the teacher was surprised and was like, no, don't say that, that's mean. And he responded, no, like she's actually gay. Everyone knows, and the teacher just looked back incredulously at the girl student and she just nodded, laughing her head off. Dude has a great job as a copywriter now. I don't know if it's the best thing, but I remember actually doing something when I didn't give a darn about the majority of my classmates' junior year of high school, USA. It's about most of the way through one of the semesters. Last one I think, and this one poor kid, albeit I have some awkward history with him from middle school, has been called Butters as a nickname for a few years. The more or less popular kids seemed to me like everyone, except the people I actually talked to, could be considered the popular kids, but I didn't pay actual attention to that nonsense. Were edging him on to keep the name and he really didn't like it. I was fed up hearing what sounded like bullying and decided to tell them to stop. I went back and forth a bit, and I think what happened is that the poor kid told me to stay out of it. I really don't remember. I got flustered and got back to whatever book I was reading. Bonus, I think it was the previous year one of the popular kids, literally asked out loud, who is Rain Crystal? Funny thing, I share an extremely similar name to another person in my grade. They'd be Ray and Crystal. I held my hand up because they were right behind me, blushing majorly because that's such a how could you ask that when we've been at the same school for several years, and at one point in middle school a friend told me you might have had a crush on me. I'm baffled all these years later, but I do laugh about it. 10th grade. The quiet band geek. He was a bit of a goofball, so not exactly quiet when he was with the people he wanted to be with, but everyone else he kept to himself, mostly. There was this jock type, one of the more popular fellas, with a cop for a dad who he let everyone know about, as if that gave him more authority, to be in his whole point anyway. The jock keeps going around to all his friends saying he could smash the band geek anytime he wanted. The band geek, when approached by many people from different circles about this guy's sheet talking was simply, he knows where I am. Eventually a party was coming around. It was at another popular guy's house, and the band geek was the host's cousin. The band geek brought his recent first girlfriend. Quite a milestone for him. The jock bully had gone around that day at school saying the band geek's girlfriend was ugly. The band geek responded in kind, stating that if he turned up to the party, it'd be on like Donkey Kong. Because, according to the band geek, he's finally coming to where I am. Jock turns up, and a couple of guys go up to the band geek. Hey, X is here. Band geek doesn't miss a beat, gets up, meets him in the living room, jackknifes him against the wall, and throws him to the floor like a faking rag doll. Strange, considering he was at least a size smaller than the jock. Saw the jock literally scurrying and crawling back towards the front door as band geek stalks him back outside. Jock bolts outside, runs halfway across the street to square up. Band geek laughs and goes back inside. He'd won and he knew it. About an hour later, Jock's cop daddy turns up out of uniform, but still pressing his authority as a cop, threatening to break up the party. The host's older brother met the cop at the door and told him to fuck off until he came back in an actual cop car and a uniform. Turned out that the band geek didn't think much of bullies and had squarely beat anyone who had tried to bully him during primary school. By the time he got to high school he'd calmed down, but the jock wanted to test that theory. Jock changed schools and became an amateur bodybuilder. My money's still on the band geek if it ever came to blows again. Was far from the quiet kid, and probably not the best thing, but sort of relevant. Junior year of high school I was at the thespian district competition. At the end of the day/evening the best pieces from each category are chosen to perform in front of everyone. Critique's choice. One of the categories is monologues, but the requirement is that you have to perform two contrasting monologues, comedy/drama, Shakespearean/modern, etc. Critique's choice piece for monologues comes on. The guy's first monologue is Lucky Ian's infamous scene from The Boys Next Door. For those that don't know, Lucky Ian has severe Down syndrome. Junior year was my first year in theater, and I didn't pick up that the actor was playing someone who was mentally handicapped, and the monologue begins with Lucky Ian attempting his ABCs in a courtroom. Since I was oblivious and didn't realize this, I let out a huge laugh inside of a dead silent auditorium full of theater kids. As one can imagine, my laugh was followed by everyone around me giving me dirty looks. TLDR, I laughed at the mentally handicapped unknowingly. Coincidentally enough I played one of the leads in The Boys Next Door the following year. It's an awesome and very important show that I highly recommend everyone read/see/watch the movie adaptation of. My younger brother was the designated quiet kid in his classes. He never spoke much once he entered high school. While I was in my last, I'd observe him being with only one or two friends during lunchtime. Now, he was a quiet kid, but that didn't mean meek. He was 5'10", while most of his classmates probably stood at 5'3" or 5'5". He also wasn't a skinny or lanky kid. He was a pretty big dude. If he put more work into it, he could have gotten into football, probably, but nonetheless he kept to himself a lot. For some reason, he had this guy who kept bothering him during his science class. Skinny dude, who saw how quiet he was, and decided he would be an easy target to torment. Looking over his shoulder at whatever he was working on, borrowing pencils and erasers without asking. Some pretty small things. My brother didn't say much about it. I'd imagine he was probably annoyed though. He didn't even know the guy and he would constantly take his stuff. One day after lunch, apparently he brought his sandwich to class to eat because he didn't get to eat it during lunch when he stayed in another class to finish some late homework. The teacher wasn't in the class yet, so kids were still coming in before the second bell. Same kid walked up to him, saw his sandwich, and decided to snatch that over the more menial objects he had in the past. My brother knocked him out with one punch in the face. Apparently he just fell over unconscious. The teacher walked in and everyone else told him what happened, and my brother got sent to the principal's office. He got a 3-day suspension. After that, the guy never talked or walked anywhere near him again. I'm probably an asshole, but I laughed so hard when he told me about it. I've always been the quiet kid both at school and university. English is not my first language, so I'm sorry if this is bad. In my final year of university, we had a group project that which we were randomly assigned into groups. The group I had was awful. The one person finishes his part then disappears for the rest of the semester, and I was stuck with 2 other people who told me that they did not care of the subject only to pass. I brought this up with the lecturer many times. The first guy said he was done with his part and did not want to do extra work, and the other 2 kept promising they'd finish their work. Every week they sent me tiny updates, but it was not enough. The weekend before the project is due, I'm crying in the lab because my part dependent on the other 2 guys, and I stayed in the lab the whole night to finish phys in mine. The morning the project is due, we had a lecture and the lecturer asks how we found the project. I was sleep deprived and angry, and I stood up and said that I found it to be extremely bullshit and faking ridiculous that we could not choose our own groups, and despite me complaining several times he did not help remedy the situation, and my entire scholarship was on the line because of some idiots who did not care if they scrapped through. Lecturer was silent and said he is sorry I felt that way, and I said it is not enough to be sorry. The whole class was silent and I stormed out. A kid in class always sat at the back. This was tutorial period every morning. He didn't talk to anyone and all he did was answer his name to the register. One morning he comes in and someone else in tutor said to him, "I faked your mum last night." XX sits down and doesn't pay attention to it. This cycle repeats every day until the end of school, when we had stand down day. I don't know what this is in America, but the people from the UK will understand. When we are all sat in the hall looking at old cringe photos of us and everyone else in the year being projected onto the wall, our head of year gets up and starts presenting awards like most likely to be an Olympian, most likely to be on reality TV CT. The last award was most likely to use an your mum insult, so the kid saying "I faked your mum" to X every day won it. He then points at X and gestures him sticking his dick in his mum with his fingers. X then stands up with his phone showing a picture of the kid's older sister, giving X the time of his life, should I say, and he then says, "I faked your sister, beach." Our head of year was dumbfounded, and the rest of the year group started clapping and cheering for X. Was the best moment in school by far. Just for those wondering, X was 16, legal in the UK, and the annoying kid's sister was 17, so nothing illegal happened to my knowledge. Was the quiet kid in class. I hated high school and was constantly bored because I didn't want to bother with the stress of the advanced placement classes. Constantly got placed in technical or college prep classes because I didn't argue with the registration people. One day, teacher begins lecturing about a really complicated historical topic that really is split down the middle about what they think happened. Mass dying off of Central/Southern American tribes post European contact. She said in front of everyone that they all died due to war, despite what the textbooks said, and that anything else was a lie. I never spoke in the class. The other students were difficult to talk to, and they always just wanted me to do their homework, so I kept to myself. This particular day, I was dozing off in the corner. She threw a marker at me and said, "Do you have anything you would like to the discussion, sir? Since you ace all my tests and never contribute, how about you enlighten us with your knowledge?" I then proceeded to correct her in front of the whole class, explained the complex issues of that situation, offered a rational theory as to what happened, and then as soon as I finished, I said to her that truth is subjective, and that you can never truly state something as being a pure fact. because unless you were there at the event, we will never know what actually happened. This teacher had a really bad habit of flying off the handle when she was corrected or someone had a different opinion than she did. I got sent to the principal's office for being disrespectful, and on my way out the door, I said to her, you may want to get your money back for your rebate master's degree. I don't think it's doing you any justice. So let's just say I'm the quiet kid. By the way, love in UK, it's like late year 7, age 12, and I was being bullied by some year 10s. One day these three assholes try and jump me, knife, box cutter, and everything, like right out front of the school in the morning. Just for extra context, they were bullying me all year, and I started going to therapy as my parents started noticing my emotional instability. This whole situation made me feel really scared, as living in Britain I thought being mugged was only in the US, 'cause of guns. No offense. They tell me to give them everything. I just said no. It made them look really confused, as if they thought that wasn't an option for me. So the one with the knife swung at me with the knife and I just snap. I hit the guy's hand down and the knife went into my upper thigh very close to my hip. The feeling of that knife plunging into my leg must have made something else snap, as the unknown strength that came with rage was released and I beat the shit out of 3 kids twice my size, not unharmed though. Broke a rib, all the fingers in my right hand, and my right wrist. Some kid recorded the whole thing and had to come to court to testify, as I was under a charge for attempted assault and battery and was looking at under a juvenile detention center. The video was all that was needed to turn the case around on them. They are all in juvie and the parole hearing is on a few weeks, so thought I should share this story. In middle school, I was the quiet kid. I was incredibly socially awkward and I don't think anyone really liked me. Keep in mind, I was also absolutely clueless about a lot of things. It's health class, and we are on the topic of germs and bacteria and cells and stuff. We have one of those huge box TVs on the stand that you knew was gonna occupy you for the entire class. The guy on the video kept calling cell reproduction as making babies, and at one point he phrased it like, so they get in you, and they just keep making babies, and making babies, and making babies, and my dumbass decides to yell, just like the Kardashians. Which isn't really that funny to anyone reading this, maybe, who knows. The entire class thought it was hysterical and they were, surprisingly, laughing their ass off. I really had no clue why it was so funny, and I was amused by the great reception of my seemingly amazing joke. The good part is my logic behind the joke. I was a clueless kid, so my logic was, reality show stars, a family, a lot of them, a lot of babies, a lot of baby making. Pretty harmless. I had no clue, and it was only until much later that I found out why the teacher for that class decided to sit me out in the hallway for the rest of the period. TLDR made a great dirty middle school level joke with no clue why it was so great. Edit. This might not really be that interesting at all, and I've never really told this story to anyone because it was more of a you had to be there thing, but when else am I gonna answer these prompts? Entirely blowing my own trumpet here, and I understand if no one believes it. I was the quiet kid in class, and I will always remember something I did to a dude who was forever doing anything he could to get under my skin. Scene. Science class, age 17. We were working with dry ice, and the teacher had stepped out for a moment. We sat at tall tables on stools, and while leaning forward, if you wear trousers, you know how the very middle back sort of curves outwards and makes a little pocket if you're not wearing a belt. The asshole mentioned before decided it would be funny to drop dry ice down there, which understandably both hurt and pissed me off. I would just stand and let the ice drop down my pant leg, then go back to sitting down and chatting quietly with my friends. The guy did it a total of 3 times before I snapped. Just as I hear him come up behind me, I spun around off the stool, picked him up by his collar. He was always pretty short. I'm a bulky lad, always have been throughout teen years, and slammed him down on a nearby bench, held him there, and leaned in real close. Are you gonna do that again? He did not do it again, and I will always cherish the moment of his laughing, dickhead face changing to fear in less than a second. When I was in middle school, in my class was a really quiet girl named Eva. All the time she was like, hella distracted. She still had perfect grades despite not paying attention in class, or ever at all. I don't know, but to me, she always seemed like that kinda person that's secretly crazy. And it turned out true. I had another kid in my class which everyone in the school hated and bullied. Now of course I'm against bullying, but this one kid earns it himself. He goes up to random people and starts insulting and annoying them, and when they say even one word he'd be running and turning back to mock them. Even teachers were sick of him. Back to Eva, there, in 6th grade was the time she absolutely flipped. She was always calm and quiet, even if that kid was annoying her, but that one time, shit really went down. She suddenly burst out screaming like a banshee, like that scream you hear in action movies when someone's about to lose their shit. Then, Eva proceeded to charge at him, and kick his repeatedly in full force. In the end, even the teacher couldn't restrain her, so around 6 kids gathered around to prevent her from hurting the kid, and talk about how it wasn't worth it to go to jail for such scum like him. At this point she was basically acting like she was possessed, not only hitting him, but charging at and attacking everyone who tried to stop her. Even the boys from the football team couldn't restrain her. Long story short, she went Super Saiyan on that kid's ass and got so mad that she blacked out. I'm so late to this, but I'm going to post anyway, because this was one of the best things that ever happened at school. Maths lesson. Not exactly the quiet kid, but one of the good kids, kinda nerdy, really faking good at maths, probably an engineer or some shit now. Not the type to fuck around in school. The teacher for this class was a total asshole. Some sort of failed mathematician / academia type. Giant chip on his shoulder. This was back in the day, when computers were only just becoming a mainstream personal item. This teacher had this super fancy laptop that he used to take register on, and he'd carry it everywhere with him. He also always wore a badly fitting grey suit, had a big grey beard, and liked to throw people out of class a lot for not really doing anything wrong by shouting, "Get out" at them. Anyway, we are lining up outside the room for class and nerdy kid turns up wearing a freaking grey suit, cotton wool beard stuck to his face, seriously, and carrying a laptop. No one knows what the hell is going on. He just smiles and walks into class and sits down. We all follow, no idea what's about to go down. His whole teacher has clearly noticed that this kid has turned up to class wearing an asshole teacher costume, but is doing his level best to pretend that nothing is happening. We're all watching nerdy kid intently. He serenely opens the freaking laptop he's brought and starts furiously typing as whole teacher continues to ignore it and starts taking register, calling names as usual. Everyone is giggling and taking absolutely no notice of him at this point. All watching nerdy kid as whole teacher eventually gets to nerdy kid on the register and calls out his name. Nerdy kid stops typing, slowly looks up over his laptop at his whole teacher, and in his best authoritative voice he can muster shouts back at him, "Get out!" I have never seen someone move so quickly. At goes faking nuts, grabs nerdy kid by the arm and frog marches him out of there screaming. I think the kid got a day's suspension for it. Still have absolutely no idea why he did it. For the lulz, I guess. Former class quiet kid here, and I do remember a few stories of such moments. However, this is the one that always stuck with me the most. While I wasn't like most here, I certainly was one in my early years of high school. I made up for it in that I was usually consistent in my schoolwork and generally tried my best to be friendly with everyone. Add on to the fact that I was the youngest in the grade I was in, most of the staff and students didn't think too much if me doing something too extravagant. Come 10th grade and it's around late May / early June, so we were already preparing for the regents. I remember during one of our last days, there weren't many students in that day because most of them were seniors, and it was senior ditch day, so when our earth science class came around it was just 3 students, me and 2 of my friends. I remember at some point during the class our teacher had to leave, and there was no aides or teachers available to take her spot, and me being the nice kid with the good grades in her class, she asked me to teach until she came back. It was near the end of the period anyway. So I did my thing and tried doing the review with them, but for one reason or another they weren't taking me seriously. Note, I'm not or ever was mad at them, and they were actually great guys to hang with. It was just annoying. Eventually I got tired on it, and in the calmest way I can muster up told them that they either take me seriously or fail. Not, "Oh, you'll be more likely to fail," but just outrighting saying that they will. I knew they didn't want to retake the class next year, and honestly I didn't want them to either. They were both really smart guys and I knew they could do it, but I had to do something to give them a reason to take this whole session seriously. And thankfully, it worked. They did start paying more attention and took me and the lesson much more seriously. I had always looked in from the outside, willingly so, as I was dealing with heavier shit than high school, emotional abuse, which lead to mental health issues, etc. The mental health issues that I was dealing with caused me to constantly be tired, and I had always believed in comfort over beauty, so I'd often wear really baggy clothing, and sometimes just my pajamas because of this. I'm pretty sure people thought I was just a quiet stoner. I was a senior in a freshman German class, moved around a lot, so every place had different requirements, and these particular freshmen wouldn't shut the fuck up, and were all around rude to the teacher. This teacher happened to be my favorite in the school and genuinely loved teaching German, and is the reason I even still know a good amount of what I learned. So, after having put up with this shit for months, I finally yelled, "Stop talking." The whole room went silent, but they were quick to start talking about how they'd never heard me talk before. Thankfully, the teacher was able to cut in before things could pick back up again. It might not be the most exciting thing, but it sure as hell gave me a confidence boost. I'd gotten close to doing that in the past, but never could, so this was like tearing off an engorged tick the size of a baseball off my chest. I always ended up sitting next to this quiet kid during my computer science lecture during the second semester of my freshman year in college. Then again, usually everyone was quiet trying to understand what the hell our professor was teaching us, but he was especially quiet. Never asked questions to clarify, never responded to any prompts for examples. He just remained completely silent for the whole hour of CMSC 162. Fast forward to one class, where we were learning about a new data class which we would be using in tomorrow's lab. 10 minutes left of class. The professor has just about finished talking about the methods to keep track of the average of all the data, and comparing two items, to make sure it preserved order. And then the quiet kid says, "Oh boy, a new way to do math." For everyone to hear, we all had a laugh, even the professor. Then we meet up for the lab with a sort of preview assignment for that specific class done. When the actual class period started, the professor nodded to that kid and said to us, "Before we get started, I'll be coming around to check you have your math, brawl lab done." Not as good, but still got a chuckle out of the people who couldn't forget that moment in yesterday's lecture. It's probably not as funny as I found it when you read this, but try to understand that when you're in a classroom and the teacher wants us to be quiet and give him/her your attention, even the smallest thing can become 10 times funnier. It was total silence except for the professor, and it made that little wisecrack, especially coming from the quiet kid, go from pretty funny to hilarious. So, it's 7th grade, the douchey kid is being extra douchey, and I don't want to speak up, because every time I've ever complained about stuff like that, the kid and his friends team up and insult me. I can't really concentrate, and I look over at the other students to see if they are as annoyed as I'm. But then the quiet kid suddenly speaks up in a not so quiet way. Jesus fucking Christ. It's already hard enough to concentrate as it is. Just because you can't concentrate doesn't mean you can just make it harder for others. You cover up your low self-esteem by making school life a living hell for everyone else. But I've had enough. So shut the fuck up. Then he storms out of the room. The douchebag looks completely exasperated, and I can't blame him. I was shocked too. The quiet kid never spoke in class unless called on, and when he was called on he was so quiet you could barely hear him. The first time we've heard him speak so loudly was used to drag the hell out of the douchey kid. The douche kid went an entire 3 weeks before returning to the douche level he had before. God job quiet kid. I was the quiet kid. In my sophomore year of high school I finally lost my patience and started putting the loser boys who thought they were cool and funny in their place. Background/context. We were in the middle of a chemistry test. Now we had 3 different teachers that year because our first teacher, who was a very good teacher, had to get serious surgery, so he asked a friend to cover for him. The second teacher was also very good, but then one of the physics teachers in my high school quit, so he had to take their place. And we got another chemistry teacher straight out college who knew what he was saying, but had no clue how to teach yet, so our grades suffered. Our original teacher returned during the last 2 months of the school year and he co-taught with the third guy. Thank God he also made all the tests after that. Anyway, we were in the middle of a serious test with only the third guy monitoring us for the exam, and the idiot boys in my class were loudly talking and distracting everyone else. I couldn't focus and was already nervous as hell, so you can imagine I was mad as hell. I yelled at the top of my lungs, "If I fail this test, because you all cannot keep your mouths shut, you are all gonna get killed." I actually said that word for word because I was so pissed off. They let out a few shocked exclamations at my outburst and the useless teacher finally shut them up. I got an 80 on the test, electronic tests taken on iPad. We used iPads in my high school, so I had the results for a multiple choice test right away, and the useless teacher even quietly asked me how I did as I handed him back my reference table. I know this is hella late, but I gotta get this out there. For quick context, we have seats. The better you are, the higher closer to first chair you are. We have challenges, in which if one kid plays better than another kid in instrument sections, they take over the other kid's spot. We only had one alto saxophone player, Josh, who is kind of a bad kid. I'm in band class, and I sit about 2 chairs away from the quiet kid. One day, when the teacher is handing out challenge slips, so we can get better chairs, and Josh, probably high as fuck about 3 hours after school started, accidentally raises his hand, either to ask for one or to ask a question. The band teacher replies to this with, "Are you gonna challenge yourself?" And immediately after, Ben, quiet kid, says he doesn't need to challenge himself, he's already challenged enough, without skipping a beat, and all of us started faking dying. There was also this other time when the band teacher was getting a little upset because the trumpets weren't playing the right notes, so B starts showing us the fingerings, how to play, and Ben, at an almost yelling level, replies, "Stop fingering me." So much more shit happened that day, and it is all worth telling, so I'm gonna do that. We have a class called Intervention, which is basically a fuck-all class where you're supposed to study, but 99% of the time, teachers just let us stick off or keep teaching. I was dazed as hell one day, not from drugs or anything, I just didn't sleep that great, and when I'm in this mood, I usually find shit way funnier than it usually is. So, you can imagine how great my reaction when some Asian kid walks up to my friend, the quiet kid here, and the Asian kid says, "Damn boy, why are you looking so thick today?" And without skipping a beat, my friend looks up directly at him and says, "I don't know." Why the fuck did the Tiananmen Square massacre happen last? 1. I promise I had a class where I was next to 2 kids named Brandon, a quiet black kid, and an Asian kid that usually isn't exactly rowdy, but definitely not quiet. The 2 Brandons both like soccer, and the Asian kid's favorite team won in a recent game, and the black kid was getting pretty annoyed with it. One day the black kid decided he had enough, and when the Asian kid was talking about how his team won, he pulled up pictures of Hiroshima and showed it to the Asian kid. There were about 9 people in the space and me and the Asian kid both started laughing out as off, while everyone else was quiet. Luckily the teacher wasn't too hard us and kinda blew it off like it was nothing. I was actually the quiet kid, but here we go. So I wear cat ears to school and everyone was cool with it, so I went with it. Then I got to the second trimester of 6th grade, where I had global studies. The class sucked. Literally every day was a presentation, and I sat next to 2 dudes. I was fine with it, until they started taking my cat ears, and calling me the little kitty cat. So after telling the teacher multiple times, she basically said, "Kids are kids, deal with it." Thanks Miss Ryan, you're a great help. Later in the year we had to make a presentation about which of the global goals we cared most about. At this time I realized that the boys were harassing only girls, treating them like dogs basically, and that one of the goals was gender equality. Bingo. So when time came I had my presentation set up and waited for the perfect moment. Miss Ryan called on me and I did my presentation. which at the end included backquote, and I think we need to work on goal number 1 forgot, because people, mainly girls in this class, aren't being treated well by people like, insert the 2 boys' names. Everyone was shocked, and the 2 boys got a detention, and I got to arrange the seating chart. I had asked a friend in the class with me if it was worthy of this subreddit, and he said, yeah, I never heard you speak a word in that class. Until that day, TLDR, the quiet kid called a bully out during a class presentation and got justice. Protect yourselves with neodymium magnets. Protect your brain with magnets. Hover the magnets over your head. Do not geo. There is nothing there that will benefit you. They prey on any vulnerabilities that a human possess. Stay strong to those that are affected. Investigations are becoming more widespread. They entrap individuals for experimental purposes in a room with 1 bathroom and 40 plus prostitutes and drug addicts and other mentally insane criminals who enjoys their jobs in systematically destroying human lives in the most inhuman and extreme ways. They are led by drag queen homosexuals with a goal to create slaves by converting them into homosexuals, making it easier to control individuals. They also have these systematic gay orgies where they abuse a plethora of drugs, crack, meth, cocaine, scopolamine, etc., before severely abusing and wrapping a singular victim inhumanly. The victims were once a targeted individual before they gave up and accepted becoming a sacrifice for an unknown organization/cult. If you are a new victim of these crimes, do as much research as possible and disclose. Do not move to voices that are not around you. Schizophrenia is not the reason due to the lack of evidence proving that schizophrenia does not exist. Do not keep silent for this horrendous criminal network. They are all traffickers and they kill in the most inhumane way and call it their fun. TLDR. Criminal network/human traffickers are replicating themselves to be your spouse, military officials, or any government identity to force and fool any person into trafficking themselves into a criminal network through endless gaslighting through megaphone-like devices that targets one individual at a time and projects their voices bypassing their target's auditory cortex. Once the drone targets a person, they stay on that person 24/7 every day. If you are instructed to move to Winnipeg, Canada or anywhere for bribes, sexual favors, money, and/or free housing through any means of transportation, do not go. You are a victim of a class action crime that has gone out of hand. Do not give these criminals any more power by giving yourself up to them. You did not win anything, and being targeted by these drones means that they chose you to either traffic or murder covertly using drones with weapon attachments. Captured victims are forced into unpaid labor and forced prostitution. The targeted victim will be missing and stored away within one of their rundown homes/facilities, unable to escape or leave. Once captured, they immediately commence their routines of total control and exploitation of the fully captured person. The victims are broken down to less than nothing due to repeated rap and abuse sequences. Felons within the criminal network/organization are to either traffic or murder a victim because their data brokers does not want to exposed and has paid a great sum of currency to illegally purchase the personal records of their targets and to send a weaponized drone to the illegally purchased individual equipped with biohacking weapons to break down their targets into trafficking themselves, committing suicide or murdering others. They run criminal schools/organizations that breeds more human traffickers and prostitutes into the public. They will say anything to force you to move. We need you. We love you. Move. We want to lust your body. They work on every emotion within their target's brain and force the individual either into a blind rage or to try to confuse the person with their own emotions through a series of gaslighting and abuse into moving their targets to them. I cannot stress this enough. Do not let them force you into trafficking yourself. The felons also pretend to be some type of close friend to their victims in order to keep control over them. They are fully trained and prepared personally to place severe torture on one individual. They pair up and gang up on one individual at a time and jump said victim. They act like grade school kids, but that's due to the heavy influence of their handlers, crack, and cocaine that has degenerated. They also are heavily involved in the drug/prostitution ring, where everyone gets wrapped and are all under heavy mind control from a cocktail of different drugs including cocaine. The felons has their victims set up as empty puppets who are under complete control. The victims now turned felons slash rapists slash addicts are raised specifically to absorb abuse while abusing drugs to remain numb during their operations. Scopolamine, crack and cocaine to remain numb to any words from their victims. They train individuals this way so they can deal more damage than receive it during their illegal operations. They are completely separate from reality and are all under one criminal control. They are aware of people resisting, and they promise to do everything to try to force their targets into submitting to their handlers. Warning. These malicious drone operators will say anything to force a person to move. The terrorists will have their handlers speaking directly into their ears during their operations to murder or capture the innocent, giving them orders on their scripts made to place torture and destroy random individuals, innocent or not. They tend to target the innocent more, since these felons find it more satisfying to rap, brainwash, and intoxicate the innocent heavily until the innocent is completely empty. As soon as they are successful, they turn the captured individuals into drug addicts, hoes, and forced laborers, working for gift cards and sexual/party favors. They will always refuse to leave their targets unless the person gives in and moves to them, or if the victim gathers any evidence leading to the arrest and shutdown of these criminal networks/organizations. To the many different individuals that takes the time to read this, I'm taking the time and energy out of my life to warn everyone about a massive data breach that has occurred, and that is endangering many lives, including my own at this very point in time. This type of data breach is the very worst of its kind. Before, the biggest threat was internet crimes, malware, and viruses that may have affected your assets if you were to click the wrong link. Now your actual physical being is at risk by criminal data brokers who are currently funding these criminal networks and are providing illegally purchased records of random individuals around the world. Now, criminals today have gone above and beyond the internet and are sending drones with biohacking technologies attachments to random individuals. These weapon attachments magnetizes to specific muscles within the human anatomy of the hijacker's choosing. This allows the hijacker to manipulate small muscle tissues within the human body, such as rotating an individual's eyes at the hijacker's will to keep their victim sleep deprived. They focus on the genitals, primarily to exploit the human desire to make love with another individual through the manipulation of their genitals. Such methods, human traffickers and terrorist organizations are now utilizing these magnetic weapons attached to drones to lock a person's own body up for ransom, which could be assets, or force you to sell your body into slavery. They offer the remote of the victim's body to the victims they use to manipulate certain muscles and veins in the body in exchange for the capture of the victim's body. Human traffickers have evolved from footwork to airborne to stay covered, hiding behind custom biohacking drones ordered online and through various other biohacking black market trades. Voices in the head has been declassified and debunked as electronic biohacking through drones and neurophones funded and powered by criminal fusion centers, Scientology, and radical extremists all around the world. This was thought out to be a medical condition that is often confused with schizophrenia or another mental illness. But I challenged the theory and discovered that the public has been heavily misinformed. If a person never had a history with voices in their head that were not their own voices, and they have proof of their attackers transmitting these frequencies, how could it be a medical condition if the person has evidence of the voices being transmitted directly to his/her skull? So, not only the voices are there, they are also instructing people to either murder, rap, or traffic themselves to one of the many fusion centers, human/sex trafficking homes within ghettos, and Scientology locations, so they could convert their captives through a series of abuse and ritualistic routines 24/7 every day. They force the individual to impregnate one of their paid prostitutes that are doppelgangers to their targets. They do this to raise another human into being another drug addict/trafficker, born and raised into the criminal network, so it'll appear more natural to kill, traffic and brainwash victims. They pretend to be on the victim's side, but they really are not. They all have an illegal drill instructor that only teaches trafficked wallet abuse, rap, and how to torture. More on this. Please be safe.